Do you want to become a graphic designer? Do you want to learn how to design your own book or logo? Maybe you want to create effective marketing materials for your business. This course will help you get started. Hi, I'm Kara, Content Manager of Design at LinkedIn Learning. I bring together renowned instructors and our world-class production teams to create all the courses you'll find in our graphic design learning library. We created this course to help you take the first steps to learning design. We'll begin at the first stage of the design process, concept development. This is the most critical stage and one many often skip. Making an informed choice can mean the difference between effective designs versus just pretty designs. After that, we'll explore creativity. Creativity is one of the most important skills to help you thrive as a designer. You can learn how to break out of a creative rut and learn to silence that stifling creative inner critic. We'll then explore the fundamental building blocks of graphic design: color, typography, and layout. These topics are essential for all design and a perfect place for any new designer to begin. We'll also look at different types of design, including logos, magazines and catalogs, digital publishing, and more. From there, we'll move on to the topic of software. I'll walk you through all the major players so you'll feel confident that the tools you learn will meet the needs of your projects. This course is meant to be a general overview of the topics you need to know. I won't be covering them in depth, but I will provide suggestions of LinkedIn Learning courses that focus on each topic. So let's get started learning all about design and the design skills you need to create great work. So, you have a design project and you are ready to dive into InDesign to start creating. Before you do, take the time for one of the most important, yet often overlooked, parts of the design process: concept development. Before you turn on your laptop or iPad, the right way to start any design project is to pick up your old trusty pencil and paper and simply sketch. When you first brainstorm an idea, it's usually the most common and expected solutions that first pop into your head, so it's vital that you push beyond those. Sketching will force you to use your imagination. Find a quiet and inspiring place to work, grab a coffee, put on your favorite music, and give yourself a specific amount of time to really think, research, and experiment. If you need a boost of inspiration to help you start, Stefan Muma's Creativity, Generate Ideas in Greater Quantity and Quality is a great resource to learn helpful idea generation tips. Another effective strategy in design is using story. Some of the greatest designs that have captured our attention and our hearts have done so because they use story. In our course, Storytelling for Designers, you'll learn the elements of a compelling story and how to weave narrative into pictures and graphics in a way that your audience will respond to. An important component of storytelling involves creating an emotional connection with an audience member. So remember, design is so much more than colors, images, and typography. The way to set your design apart is starting with a strong concept. In this age of everything digital, it's still essential to sketch and draw your ideas. Sketching away from the computer and all the distractions it holds allows you to focus on concepts and outline a direction that supports the goals of your project. It's easy to get pulled into choosing fonts and picking colors you love versus making thoughtful and informed decisions about how these elements work together and what they communicate. Think of it as one of your key tools alongside your favorite software and apps. You don't have to be a master draftsman, but you do need to feel like you can convey your ideas quickly with simple sketches. If your drawing skills are strong, this can be a huge asset and a valuable skill that you can bring to your team and clients. If you're able to create some of your own illustrations, this can also save time and money. Now, if you don't feel like your drawing skills are where you'd like them to be, don't panic. Look for our Drawing Foundation series. Here, you'll get guidance on perspective, shading, drawing the figure and landscapes, and more. These are more traditional fine art drawing courses and will teach you how to render what you see. For another great group of courses, look at the drawing challenges with talented illustrator Von Glitschka. Whether you choose one of his 5-day challenges or the 21-day challenge, they are really fun and will get you into a daily habit of drawing. So grab a sketchbook and start getting your brilliant ideas down on paper. Why should you care about graphic design history? In the words of Sean Adams in his course, Learning Graphic Design History, one of the best tools to be a great designer is to have a wide visual vocabulary. History gives us that. Designers often focus on what's hot today and spend time trying to determine what's going to be hot tomorrow. Design is a field obsessed with all things on the cutting edge. Having knowledge of design evolution and cultural influence gives you a smarter and more varied toolbox to work from. Understanding the simplicity of the typography and emotional connection to color of the Bauhaus, as well as the handmade and unique principles of the arts and crafts movement, may help inspire your best work. It's also helpful to know what design trends were popular when, so you can use those styles in a design related to that time period. For example, say you're designing a poster promoting an exhibit of rock memorabilia from the 60s. Your design will more effectively communicate the event if the colors and typefaces you choose are from that period. Knowing history is essential to creating remarkable design. Creativity is the fuel artists and designers depend on. Many believe it's an elusive force that comes out of thin air, except when it doesn't. Who hasn't sat in front of a blank canvas, a sheet of paper, or a computer screen waiting for inspiration to strike? Creativity is more complex than simply thinking of ideas. It can also involve overcoming major emotional blocks. As artist Amy Nguyen shares in the weekly series, Creativity for All, she feels fear and vulnerability when looking at a big looming white canvas. In this same series, photographer Ben Long shares his taxonomy of creative fears, ranging from a fear of bad ideas to a fear of discovering you're not good at what you do. Yet another creative block can be our own harsh inner critic, and Denise Jacobs created an entire course to help you with this, called Banish Your Inner Critic to Unleash Creativity. Are you seeing a pattern here? Even experienced creative professionals struggle with finding and nurturing creativity. Do you experience this? I know I have. Now, take a deep breath. There are so many courses that can help you with your own creative practice, such as Creativity Bootcamp, Learning Brainstorming, and Breaking Out of a Creative Rut. It's not always easy to find the fuel you need to break through a creative impasse, but hopefully some of these ideas can help you go beyond it and create designs that you truly love. The core elements that make up every design are layout, typography, and color. To be a good designer, you have to have a deep understanding of how each of these elements contributes to the overall message. It's like cooking. You need to know each of your ingredients and what they'll go well with before you can combine them successfully. Layout is extremely important because it's the structure or skeleton of the piece and therefore drives the overall design. Layouts can feel peaceful and serene, dynamic and functional, or even chaotic. The right mood for the work just depends on the audience and the goal of the piece. Almost anything goes in the right context, with one exception, a design that feels dull or lifeless. This is all determined by your choices of color, balance, scale, and density of type and image. These are the elements of design that, when used correctly, will enable you to set the right tone and create a strong composition. The role of type in design is so much more than just communicating a message in words. Type creates an impression before the words are even read. Good typography communicates the message of the design. It should be tailored to the intended audience through the chosen typeface and how it's set. For example, the goal for the typography on an income tax return form is legibility. There is no room for creative expression here, and the design is purely functional. On the other hand, if you're designing a poster for an exciting event, the type is critical to create interest and represent the appropriate feel. Typography is complex, but once you know the rules, you'll know when you can push the boundaries a bit, and you'll be able to set beautiful type like a pro. Color plays an important role in every design, both visually and emotionally. Color can be a crucial part of brand identity. Color can make us feel a certain way. And because of the cultural connotations associated with color, it also plays a huge role in helping to communicate a message. Think of these three elements, layout, type, and color, as your building blocks of design. With a solid understanding of how to use all three, you will be on your way to creating designs that your viewers will connect with. Graphic design is all around us, from logos, magazines, and posters, to signs, product packaging, and marketing pieces, not to mention social media. Each type of design has a specific job. Understanding what that job is will help you create a successful design. Regardless of the type of project, the job of design is to attract attention while visually communicating the essence of what or who it represents in the most immediate way. There's a common misconception that good design is beautiful, but getting it right isn't just about making it pretty. It's about making sure it delivers your message in a way that resonates. So let's talk about a few different types of design projects. Logos are highly condensed graphics, packed with meaning. Because of that, every design decision is that much more critical when it comes to crafting the message it communicates and who it communicates to. The most important first step is understanding the client, who they're trying to reach, and what they're trying to say. With that information in hand, you can then explore which colors, images, and type will best communicate the intended message to the intended audience. Magazine design is complex due to the volume of text and images a designer needs to organize and present logically. Its main job is to present the content to the reader in a way that's easy to navigate while also creating an immersive experience. Infographics are visual representations of information, and their job is to tell stories in a fun, engaging, and easy-to-digest way. Lastly, we have marketing materials and catalogs. These have a number of jobs that we've already mentioned, such as capturing our attention, telling the story of the brand, and in some cases, providing visual beauty and delight. These are just a few types of design projects you may work on. But no matter what job you have, it's essential that you truly understand the product or client you're promoting, the intended audience, and the purpose of the piece. If you don't, you'll fail to communicate your message, and its beauty will only be skin deep. We've already discussed the importance of sketching and planning. Once you get your concept down on paper, you'll need to create a digital version for distribution and, in many cases, refinement. Although there's no shortage of tools to choose from, in today's graphic design world, most designers are using three main applications in either desktop or mobile format: Adobe InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. InDesign is a layout tool for producing documents for print and on-screen delivery. This includes print publications, interactive documents, online catalogs, stationery, ebooks, and more. Text and images import easily, and InDesign has a rich collection of tools that will enable you to customize every element of your design. To edit and create images and videos, or work out concepts, Photoshop is your best bet. It's great for taking care of common editing tasks like cropping and straightening, color and tonal adjustments, and retouching. One of the many benefits of editing in Photoshop is the ability to edit non-destructively, working in layers, using masks, and more. Now, when you need to create a work that can be scaled up indefinitely and never degrade in quality, such as logos that may be used at wildly different sizes, you need a program that can create scalable vector art. Illustrator is perfect for this. It's also great for creating freehand drawings, as well as tracing and recoloring scanning or captured art. Many use Illustrator for creating logos and icons, illustrations, and even setting type. It's an essential tool for any designer. Learning software takes time, but these types of programs are vitally important and can enable you to create work beyond what you can create with pen and paper alone, opening up endless possibilities. There are many things to consider when it comes to print. Costs can range wildly, depending on the quantity, size, printing method, paper, special treatments, finishes, and more. There are a lot of decisions to be made for each printed piece, and one uninformed choice can result in unexpected costs and outcomes. Let's say you're doing a brochure for a cosmetics company, and your client wants to show off the bright colors and shine. If you choose the wrong paper, that image could be dull and lifeless, resulting in a blown schedule due to an expensive reprint, and worse, an unhappy client. But don't worry, when it comes to print, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know the right questions to ask, and you need to share the details of your vision with your printer. If they know the look you're going for and the budget you need to stick to, they can help you make the right choices. We have a series of courses called Print Production Essentials that covers packaging, folding, choosing paper, and more. Managing your first print project doesn't have to be intimidating. By applying the knowledge you'll learn in these courses, you'll have the confidence to be able to make the right decisions and have a successful outcome. When creating a piece that will be digitally distributed, you have a number of options. The most common is a PDF. Most can access it, but it's fairly limited in terms of interactivity or rich media support. Adobe's Publish Online is another easy-to-use option that allows users to publish a document via a unique URL. This way, anyone with the link, desktop or mobile, can access it. You also have the ability to include any of InDesign's interactive elements, including hyperlinks and buttons, audio and video files, multi-state objects, and even InDesign animations. Additional options with easy-to-use interfaces, perfect for social media posts, are Adobe's Spark Post and Canva. These are WYSIWYG applications, or what you see is what you get, that give users the ability to combine photographs, illustrations, and text into a single post. This is a space that's changing quickly, so be sure to do your homework before setting out. Creating and distributing ebooks has become significantly easier and more accessible over time. The tricky bit is knowing which format is right for your project. Ebooks have come a long way in terms of developing industry-wide standards, including EPUB, which is now the most widely supported format. But if you're serious about distributing your ebook far and wide, you can't ignore Amazon's Kindle format. This is a proprietary format that is only available on Amazon. If you're new to design and want to produce and publish your own book, Apple's iBooks Author is a beautiful and easy-to-use solution if you're okay with your book being available on Apple devices only. One more great option is Adobe's Publish Online, an easy-to-use tool that allows you to publish directly from InDesign as long as you aren't planning on monetizing your book. The technology around ebooks is always evolving, so research the various platforms often so you have the most up-to-date specs on each one. Let's take a moment to go beyond the basics of design and discuss some other key things that will help you on your career path. Brand strategy is a critical part of design, and yet designers aren't typically trained in communication or marketing. Branding is a complete system that communicates a brand's message and therefore impacts all aspects of your design project, from packaging to marketing. Emotional connection and consistency all play a role in good brand design. Where and how you work are important considerations and require different skill sets. Do you want to work for yourself or at an agency? Or do you want to be part of an in-house design team? If your dream is to land a spot on an in-house design team, this is very different from working as a freelancer. You'll want to be armed with really great interpersonal skills and find ways to thrive in a corporate and at times more bureaucratic environment. On the other hand, if you plan to run your own design business, knowing how to earn passive income while you're focused on more intensive design projects may be a major part of keeping your business profitable. And one last thought, and this is really important. Remember that as with any field, having related skills that keep you well-rounded will help set you apart. Here are a few examples. Having solid photography skills may help you land a project creating social media designs. A good working knowledge of web design will keep you current and relevant and expand your design skills beyond print. And an understanding of art direction may help open doors to opportunities for promotion at your company. My parting words of advice are keep an eye out for ways you can expand your skills, have the courage to try new things, and always be learning. I hope this course has provided you with a helpful overview of our amazing design courses and empowered you to determine what you need to learn and where to get started. There are 2 series that I especially want to point out. Our Essential Training series is a great place to start when learning a new piece of software. And check out our Foundation series for more information on the key elements of design, such as layout, color, typography, and more. Both series have been created for those who are new to a topic, so they cover the essentials and will prepare you to start your design journey with confidence. We also have a number of weekly series where a single technique is covered in one movie. This will give you a quick dose of inspiration, learning, and creativity when you may not have the time to get into a longer course. The topics are really varied, so you never know what cool new thing will be featured and how that may influence the work you're doing. Regardless of where you're at in your design education, there will always be something new to learn. You got this. Thanks for watching.
Hello there, my name's Tony Harmer and I'd like to welcome you to this course introducing you to the world of graphic design. Increasingly referred to these days as communication arts, but I think for the sake of clarity throughout, we'll stick with graphic design. This course has been written based on my experiences in enterprise design teams, small to medium businesses, as well as being a freelance designer for many, many years. You may well enjoy such variation in your career, and indeed, I hope that is the case. I'm convinced variety is an essential component of keeping it fresh and real in this profession, as it may be so in others. So you're just starting out, and what we've aimed for here and what I've tried to put together for you is the essential guide to becoming a graphic designer in an easy to digest form. We'll be covering the fundamental concepts and topics associated with being a graphic designer, looking at the elements of graphic design and using the recognised industry standard production tools. There are quizzes at the end of each chapter, and I'll also be giving you a few small exercises to practice with. These are entirely self-guided and there's no actual answer to any of them. It will be up to you to self-critique or maybe discuss with your peers, your friends, or even perhaps your family. You should find them fun though, and they're nice to revisit from time to time. Some of the later chapters have exercise files so that you can work along, and you can download those to your computer and keep them in a handy location while you're working throughout the course, and an overlay will tell you which file you need to have open. Everywhere you look, graphic design is all around you. The interface on the device that you're looking at this course on, the cover of almost every book you own, the packet of your morning cereal, the titles of your favourite film or programme, the logo on the brand of your favourite shoes, the cover of your favourite album, some of the clothes and t-shirts you wear. It's everywhere. And graphic design is the art of using visual elements, typography and colour to convey a message. It's about communication, it's about interpretation, and it's about attraction, and it's been with us for a very long time, developing and evolving alongside our societies. Although many people think that graphic design is just about making pretty pictures, it's of course so much more than that. It's about understanding a message and using a combination of research, creativity and media to convey that message in a way that is both aesthetically and functionally balanced. You'll find a lot of different titles for all of the disciplines around the world of graphic design. But all of them, no matter what their job title is related to, in their specialism, they will have studied and employ the fundamental elements of layout and composition, colour and typography. This course has a chapter devoted to each of those topics where you can get started on your journey into the world of graphic design. But first, let's take a look at the creative process, how we get from an idea to a finished work. What is the creative process? If we're talking about creativity itself, then it's a very difficult thing to pin down. And you're going to find there are probably as many theories about creativity as there are people who create. Essentially, it's the ability to go beyond traditional concepts, patterns, rules, interpretations, and relationships to create or synthesize something new and meaningful as a result. Simply put, creativity is a way of thinking. There's no magic formula that can be used for every circumstance or recipe for guaranteed success. Part of your journey as a designer will indeed involve failures if you're doing it right. It's owning and learning from them that will help you to improve. But the process, for our purposes here as graphic designers and communication artists, begins with a creative brief. And after that, the process I work to is distilled down into 3 phases, which are research, where you gather all of your background information; ideation, where you work things out and employ your creativity and iterate with different ideas; and finally production, where the final artwork is prepared for delivery. In this chapter, we'll take a look at the topics of research and ideation in a little more detail. Towards the end of this title, you're going to get to do some common production tasks in the industry standard tools of Adobe's Creative Cloud. So let's dig in and find out more about the creative brief. A good creative brief is developed by the client and or the designer, and quite frequently together. It forms the definition of a project and needs to inform everyone working on it of its goals, scope and vision. It'll identify the target audience, the overall objectives and the potential lifespan of the project, along with any constraints and some scheduling details. It's this that you'll refer to throughout the phases to ensure that the ideas and the work are meeting those objectives. An example of the content of a creative brief, and not necessarily in this order, would include something like why. What's the scope of the project, including its goals? What's going to be produced, the message that's intended to be conveyed, and the CTA or call to action. It's the compelling argument or offer that's meant to invoke some sort of anticipated response. Who the target audience is that the project is aimed at. How the message and tone of the content, and the timeline for all of the different phases and the deliverables, as well as the stakeholders. Who needs to be involved in the project, who's managing which parts, who signs off each of those parts, and indeed the final production. And then the bottom line, the budget, which is the final amount which will be invoiced at the end of the project. Design begins with research. It may be that you get handed exactly what you require by your client or a team that you work with, but it's also likely that you'll need to collect some or all of the information yourself as well. With the client, you'll need to be familiar with the brand and its values. You'll need to find out about their tone and their mood. Could you personify their customers or the intended audience if the aim is to attract a new audience? You'll have to look at aspects of their identity and take into account their use of typography, their colours, the imagery they use, any logos or other marks which are often called graphic devices, current imagery and more. The better your research, the more likely your project will be a pretty good approximate fit from the outset. Armed with your research, you should now be able to move into the ideation phase. Begin with creating something like mind maps to distill your thoughts, and then create mood boards to show them physically and work as a reference throughout the ideation phase. Mood boards are a collection of different sources derived from your research and initial ideas that you can add to and refine as you bounce thoughts around. Use the web, use books, use your camera, use fabrics, use anything that you feel is connected to your ideas. Typically, and in my humble opinion, the best way, these are a form of collage on physical boards, such as foam core board that you can stick things to easily with glue and will accept pins and so on. If you preferred, you could just as easily use a digital board on a site like Pinterest, and I suppose the advantage there is you don't need to be in the same location to view the boards with your colleagues. The downside would be that you're maybe not exploring other sources effectively, and you're robbing yourself of the wonderful tactile experience of sticking loads of inspiration onto boards. Also, all of that is giving you more time to think and process. How you decide to assemble yours, of course, is entirely up to you. And when I'm working on a project essentially myself, I admit I use both approaches. But when I've worked in teams, it's been the physical variety almost every time, often taking up a whole wall in the studio as well. When you are visualizing ideas, it's important not to bypass entirely the process of sketching out your ideas and jumping straight into the production software. This is perhaps a bad idea for a number of reasons, but mostly that your level of expertise may inhibit your creativity. You're thinking more about the operation of software than you are your idea. While that pencil is busy skipping across the page making marks as you're making those roughs, your brain is processing all the time, and this can sometimes be where you have that aha moment. So don't skip over that particular part of the process. It's a valuable time that should move quickly, be responsive to change or new branches of thought, and really explore the possibilities without over-investing in production technique. You shouldn't worry too much about the production stages at this time. You'll cross that bridge when you come to it, as it were. While the previous movie suggests that ideation is completely analog, it is possible to work at least partly digital though. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Adobe Photoshop Sketch. It allows me to work in a way that still gives me time to process what I'm doing, but with some of the advantages of the digital world, such as not having to carry an entire studio's worth of media around with me. It's also been designed for ideation and is not really production software such as Illustrator, Photoshop or InDesign that you'd use to assemble the finished work, but it does feed into those products when you're ready to move into production. There's also Adobe Comp that allows you to work on layout ideas. You can even use real production assets as well if you have them, and then push that to the desktop software for further work and refinement. If you want to find out more about mobile apps for designers, then be sure to check out my titles on them here on the library. Production is the final phase of the creative process, and it's the part where all of those software tools come into play and you turn those ideas into actual artwork ready for printing or digital delivery. Artwork in the graphics world is how the final files are referred to, and the term artworker that you may hear is someone who primarily builds production files. As people have become more multi-skilled these days, it's common to hear the term creative artworker used to describe people who both design and prepare artwork. Artwork production is a skill all of its own. It's as meticulous as it is exacting. It's also the part of the process that can go horribly wrong if you're diving into it without learning some very important fundamentals. While most digital projects are relatively straightforward, designing for print is not so. For a good look into the intricacies and pitfalls associated with print production, you could do a lot worse than checking out Claudia McHugh's course, Learning Print Production, after watching this course. She's got a wealth of production knowledge and she delivers it with good humour, so you'll enjoy it and it will be time well spent, trust me. I'm being completely honest when I tell you that being on good terms with printers and learning to understand their role in the end of stream production process has saved my neck on more than one occasion. I had a slight insight as I actually started out as a printer, but I moved from the shop into the studio. It wasn't that I was a bad printer, but my heart wasn't in it because I longed to be on the creative side. I just didn't have the advantage some of my friends did, and I had to get a job straight from school and earn my way into an education. But that part of my life and career paid dividends, so don't avoid learning more about print production. In the final chapters of this title, we will work through some common tasks in production software that you may come across frequently in your career. and hopefully you'll have an enjoyable experience that will lead you to learning more and more as time goes on. But don't stop at this introduction. You'll need to learn a lot more and continue to do so throughout your career. There is always more to learn. When we talk about a design space, we're talking about the area in which we are working. And I'm not talking about your desk and your chair. I'm talking about whether it's a page or a spread or a banner or a screen or any other kind of thing that you're designing on. And there are a number of ways that we can divide that up before we begin putting anything onto it. So let's just have a look at a few different ways that we might divide things up and some of the theories around page or design space division. Let's start off by looking at photography, because photography for a long time has employed something called the rule of thirds, and in fact so has classical art, a way of dividing the image up into 9 different sections, all in thirds. And you can treat each section itself as a design environment. Typically, the horizon would have been aligned along the bottom third, although sometimes for an extreme effect, or if you're perhaps doing a landscape, it would be the top third. Anywhere apart from the middle, because that's the bit that's really boring if it looks too symmetrical. You can use the intersections of the lines as points of interest as well. You can align either directly on them or, as is the case here, towards them. Another theory is that of the golden section and the golden spiral or the Fibonacci spiral. And that may help you create a pleasing layout. And you can see here how this layout, or the area within the margins, conforms to a golden spiral layout. So when you're dealing with things like banners, for example, that's a completely different design environment in which the spiral isn't readily accommodated as a whole, but there's nothing to stop you dividing it into sections. You could take an easier approach though and use something like columns, as has been done here. These are pretty much squares as they go out, and you could subdivide those also to help you position other elements, and that way you'll get a nice proportioned layout for whatever environment you're working in. On pages, there's lots and lots of theory around those, but again, the system you're most likely to use is based on columns, and it's quite common to subdivide those so that you get flow lines across the page, just to help you divide things up nicely. And all great design starts that way, by dividing up the design space before you start thinking about the positioning of elements, which is what we're doing in the next movie. Now that we have an understanding of the design space, it's time to take a look at and consider placing elements within it. There are 6 principles of design, the first of which is balance. Elements on the page or in the design space should be balanced evenly within that space, but this doesn't always mean symmetry. Asymmetry works too, and it is just as important to be aware of the negative space as it is of the positive or occupied space. Alignment creates order, allowing elements to be visually connected, and their proximity to one another creates associations, although this doesn't necessarily mean that their location exclusively suggests that similarity. Other design elements, such as colour or typography, can suggest associations with similarity too. Playing with the balance, proximity and alignment can create tension, and again here, using the negative space but also breaking the frame, that's pushing something out of the design space to some degree, creates tension, and you'll particularly see this technique used a lot in movie posters. Contrast makes impact and can be used to show areas of importance, highlighting the key areas in a design. Contrast is a very, very important element, guiding you through the main areas of your design, and in some cases, with colour particularly, an accessibility consideration too. Repetition adds strength to a design and can help create consistency in a layout by connecting individual elements. Repetition creates a rhythm in your design, and you can actually add beats to that by using interruptions in the repetition too. We can use the principles of balance, alignment, repetition and proximity to create hierarchies in our design, which themselves may repeat throughout it. And finally, space. It's not just the final frontier in Star Trek, because for us it's a consideration as well. One of the Gestalt design principles is that of closure, where we literally fill in the gaps between figures or objects on the layout and ground, the design space behind us, and we can suggest other shapes with shapes and forms that we add to the layout. Now that you've grasped the basics of layout and composition, it's time for us to have a look at grids, which are an essential feature to give you a sense of proportion in the page and help you to build your layout. Let's have a look at some of the anatomical features you'll come across. The first of which is the margins, which gives you a way to position your main layout within the design space, but also some functional reasons as well. If you were working on a book or magazine, for example, you definitely need margins on the outside edges of the pages, because that's where somebody would actually hold the page. Columns can help you to divide up the horizontal space in a layout, and gutters, the space in between those, give a way to pace out those columns. Don't think that you have to stick content exactly within there. Like with everything else, these are just guides. And talking of guides, there's something else that can be introduced to space out your layout into different divisions of the page. And you can add flow lines to those that give you a way to examine the way you're going to present content to the reader in a flow. When you join those things together, what you end up with are sectors, and the sectors can also be expanded out into visual spacing areas and somewhere that you're going to put particular kinds of content. For example, if this was a technical publication, I might have small annotations down one side, just arbitrarily. But they can help you in any way to work out and make sense of where you're going to position elements. So do use grids. They're there to help you, but remember what I said, they're a guide, not a strict rule set. Here's an exercise that you can try out at any time, and in fact you can even refresh it as things move on. What I'd like you to do is find some magazines that you like, and then carefully remove any staples from the binding of the magazine, and try and get the spread out as intact as you can, and ideally stick it to a piece of card or foam core board. Then, with as fine a ruler as you can get, measure all of the different distances inside of that spread and start to compare them as you do that. Print out some web pages and try and identify the grids that they're laid out on. See where the points of interest are in a page, and the things that you can't see you sometimes find by extending lines. So use about 2 or 3 different colours of pencil ideally to do that. This will help you to understand how people are employing page layout techniques, even though they may not be obvious at the time, because there's that old adage, if you're doing something well, no one notices you're doing it at all. Elements shouldn't arrive on the page or in any other design space by accident. Layout and composition are one of the fundamental skills you'll need to master in order to become a proficient designer. Placing things in relation to one another establishes a hierarchy in your design and allows the viewer to be guided around it in a way that should not only be functional, but pleasing. The wireframe drawing here is establishing the layout of a magazine advertisement, and using various layout principles for dividing up the design space and placing elements within it, you can see how the finished ad is composed by using type, color, and image elements to present that visual hierarchy that guides you around the ad. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at some of the guiding principles of layout and composition, starting with looking at design spaces in the next movie. Typography is the word used to describe the art of selecting and arranging type to make its display legible, easy to consume, and appealing. It's an essential component of the graphic design skill set, and you're going to need to develop an understanding of at least the essential typographic terms and conventions. You'll discover it has a language all of its own that's evolved over centuries, and it's still in use today, even in our digital world when we're talking about type. You don't have to learn it all at once though. In this chapter we'll be covering the essentials, and you can learn more as you progress. And I can highly recommend the courses by Ina Saltz and Charles Nix as further viewing when you're ready to dive a little more deeper into the topic later. But for now, we're going to cover some of the most basic terms, some of which you may well know already. So let's see what your basic typographic knowledge is like. In the word on screen now, I have one uppercase glyph or character at the start of this word. We often call these caps or capitals too. The remainder of the type is in lowercase, and they actually get these names from the days of compositing when the type, made of metal, would be kept in wooden cases in upper and lower rows, just in case, no pun intended, you were wondering. Type sits along a line called the baseline. It's invisible to us most of the time, and I say that because some applications like Illustrator display it when you're adding or moving type around. And this is perhaps the most important line for us to be aware of, as it forms the basis of other measurements, as you'll see later in this chapter. Above the baseline is our second most important line, properly known as the X height. And it's the line that determines the height relationship between the upper and lowercase characters. Now there are other lines, but they're used in the construction of the type by the type designer, and we don't need to concern ourselves with those really. For now, you've just discovered the ones you mainly need to be concerned with. There are a couple of terms in the world of typography that are often used interchangeably, but technically they refer to different things. And you might well think, well, that doesn't really matter what you use if you're not a type nerd. Maybe it isn't, but it is useful to at least be aware of the distinctions, even if you're not using it in your day-to-day language. After all, you never know if you may one day require the assistance of one of those type nerds, and they will appreciate you using the correct nomenclature. There are two main terms that are confused, starting with font or typeface. A font is a delivery mechanism for a complete collection of a set of letter forms, like Helvetica Regular is a font. Helvetica Bold is another font. Helvetica Italic is another font. Back in the old days, these would have been metal blocks, each with a complete set of those letter forms that would be used in printing. And these days, the delivery mechanism is a piece of software containing all of the letter forms in the font, mapped to keystrokes along with some other information to make it easy to use. The typeface is the design of the letter forms, known as the characters or glyphs, and we'll speak about that in just a moment, that you see. And years ago, someone gave me a really simple way to express this using one of my guilty pleasures, cookies. Imagine you have some rolled out cookie dough and you reach for the cookie cutter to make some yummy cookies. The cookie cutter is the font. The yummy cookies that it makes are the typeface. Now, before we take a suddenly much needed cookie break, let's just resolve the thing I mentioned a moment ago. Is it character or glyph? Well, characters are the letters that you type. Glyphs are the characters that are displayed. Now, in this quote here from Paula Scher, if I decide to change the font I've used for the word meaning to an italic variant, the characters I typed were exactly the same, but the glyphs that you see are different. If I do the same with spirit and use a bold variant here, again, the characters I typed are the same, but I'm using a bold font instead of the original one. And if I go for the word combination and change that to a bold italic font, you can see that I'm now actually using in this quote alone, 4 fonts just there. So with that out of the way, let's learn about some further type anatomy. In this movie, we're going to take a look at some of the anatomical characteristics of letter forms because it gives us a point of reference when we're evaluating different typefaces for use in our projects. So let's start here with the letter H that has an ascender. That's a feature moving up above the X height, and the letter Y, which has a descender moving down below the baseline. Now this is a serif typeface, and on this letter P we can see one of the serifs at the top here on the left and also down at the bottom. Now if you want to be clever with the ones at the bottom, because they're mirrored in that way coming off of the stem, the main upward stroke of the character, you can refer to them as bilateral serifs. On the right hand side, the curvy bit, that's described as the bowl, and the negative space inside of that is referred to as the counter. Now the counter is the main feature in the letter O. It doesn't have a lot else to shout about really, other than its line of stress, which is, if you imagine the thin part there, the angle of that is often known as its line of stress. The letter Q that I'm showing you here, that has a counter, but it's interrupted at the bottom with a tail, which sounds like actual physical anatomy, and there's a lot of that in type, such as here with the letter K, which has a leg and an arm. If I go to the letter H, that has a shoulder, a characteristic that many letters have. Now, interestingly enough, this has almost a fully enclosed negative space inside of it, and when you come across that, it's referred to as an open counter in most cases. The lowercase e has a very large open counter, which if it was me, I'd call that the mouth, because the area above it is actually referred to as the eye in the case of an e. And you can see here how this particular one, which is quite cute actually, looks like a laughing face. The letter G that I'm showing you now, this is an example of a two-story character in that it fully fills up both the baseline to X height space and the baseline to descender space. This one has an ear at the top of it, and the curvy bit at the bottom, in the case of this G, is known as a loop. And linking that to the main body, we have the link. And of course, there are two counters there. The letter S doesn't have a stem, it has instead a spine, and if you think about it, that looks very much like the curve of a spine. Not quite that steep an angle, but you get the idea. This character also has a beak, and you'll find that on a few different characters as well. This 5 numeral has a flag as its main stroke across the top, and it's easy to imagine that as being perceived as a flag blowing in the wind. This letter F has a cross stroke, sometimes called a bar as well, going across the main stem of the character. And it has as well a teardrop terminal, as does the letter R that is on screen now. Now, this letter A has a different kind of terminal in that area. It's called a heavy drop terminal. You could imagine it's like a piece of water gaining in volume off the edge of a leaf or something that's about to drop. And a terminal is the end of any stroke. And if you imagine back in the days when it was hand lettering that was doing this, this is where these names come from. So there you are, there's just a few. There's no de facto language across the entire world, but you can make yourself understood with other people when you're dealing with type, in the same way that I might say tomato and you may say tomato, for example. We could figure out what we were talking about. Type had existed for quite some time before any attempts were made to classify the different typefaces. The earliest efforts were almost all made by printers, and they all failed in their attempts, and that's probably because they might have been looking after their own particular business interests, as you could understand. In 1954, the French cartoonist, writer, amongst many other things that he did, Maximilien Vaux, devised a system of classification for typefaces, grouping them together by their main characteristics. And although there have been many other attempts at categorizing type, it's the Vaux classification that is the most widely accepted system in use today. As this is an introductory course, however, we're going to use something that's slightly more straightforward and look at the classifications that are used on the Typekit website, which if you're a Creative Cloud user, you are quite likely to use. And if you want to, you could always dig deeper into type classification later on. So the classifications at Typekit are slightly more accessible, I think, to the new user, and divided into 8 classes. And the grid here shows those 8 classes pretty much as they're represented on the website. So let's start with sans serif. So that's type without serifs, the extending features that you find at the end of strokes that serif typefaces have. And these letter forms have these small projecting features that you will have seen in the movie on Type Anatomy, and you get them along with vertical strokes and diagonal to vertical strokes, and at the end of certain features as well. Next on from there, we've got slab serif, and they are much wider, much bolder, much more heavy versions of serifs. Then we have script, and they're based upon the varied strokes made by pens, and they have 2 varieties. There's formal, as you can see here, the sort of thing you maybe would have on an invite or something like that. And then casual, which crosses over with one of the classes you'll find later on. After that, we've got black letter, and that's based on the earliest printing typefaces. This is a very stylized version of such a thing. Then we have mono, which is short for monospaced, and these fonts have characters that all occupy the same character width, similar to the way that typewriters used to work. Now, it might help you to know that all character glyphs have an invisible box that surrounds them. With a monospace font, the boxes are all of the same size, irrespective of the actual width of the glyphs. In contrast, other font types are known as proportional, and they have varied widths according to each character. Let's take a look at an example here, where the word growling is set in Courier, which is a monospaced font, and you can see that the glyph boxes that I've attempted to approximate fairly accurately here are of a uniform width. Now let's bring in another line that's set in a proportional font. This happens to be Baskerville here. And if I bring in the glyph boxes, you'll see that they're all in proportion to the character widths. The eagle-eyed amongst you have probably noticed that some of those boxes overlap as well, but we'll get onto that soon enough. The next class we've got to look at is handwritten. And these are designed to look like hand-rendered lettering made with pens or brushes, and some of these may cross over to some extent with the informal script variety. And finally, we have decorative, and these are large display fonts, mostly intended to be made really big. You wouldn't use these for body copy, that's the main text in a document, but they are great for headings and anywhere where you need to use large type. They grab attention and they're much more expressive. And that's it. Typekit, if you're interested, by the way, has a thing called Typekit Practice, which is well worth checking out if you really want to get into the details of typography. There's a lot to be had in there too, as well as the other courses here on the library. Something else you're going to come across in the world of typography are ligatures. Simply put, a ligature refers to 2 or sometimes more characters replaced by a specially designed single character. The actual characters are still there It's just that they're optically replaced by the ligature. So if you copy pasted them into a basic text program or something like an HTML editor, for example, the original characters would be what you'd actually see there. The ligatures are a visual replacement in desktop publishing software. Simply put, a ligature refers to two or sometimes more characters replaced by a specially designed single character that has been created primarily to improve the look of characters that may appear to collide, or their proximity just looks awkward. The actual characters are still there, it's just that they are optically replaced by the ligature. So if you copy pasted them into a basic text program or something like an HTML editor, for example, the original characters would be just what you'd see there. The ligatures are a visual replacement made by desktop publishing software. If we look at the line of text we have here, you could perhaps see that with their normal spacing, the capital T and the lowercase h don't look comfortable together at all. And the F of fine, the last of the double Fs in spiffing, they're only narrowly avoiding those tittles. That's the name of that little dot over the lowercase i's and j's. And the F and the L in flower are bumping their ascenders together in a most undignified manner. Now compare that to a line of text that has ligature replacements for those typographic faux pas. And we can now also see there are some other ligatures present also. The ligatures you're seeing in the case of the T and the H, the F and the I, and the F and L together, they're known as standard ligatures, and an application like InDesign, Illustrator or Photoshop can make those substitutions automatically with OpenType fonts. The other kind of ligatures that you're seeing here are called discretionary ligatures, and these offer a more decorative option for you to use, well, at your discretion. And if the font you're using has these, and potentially others included, then you may decide to use those to enhance the optical flow of your text. Whatever measurement system you use in your day-to-day life and work, when you're working with text, you're likely to be using its measurement system of points. You'll sometimes see it written in full like so, but it's much more common to see that abbreviated down to a lowercase p and t for points. There are 72 points in 1 inch, and it might surprise you to know that that didn't become a standardized measurement until the beginning of the desktop publishing revolution in the 1980s, despite it being around for hundreds of years since. And just as we have collective words for groups of things, we have some for type as well. The most common of which is the pica, in which there are 12 points. And you'll see pica abbreviated also down to P. So if that's made of 12 points, you could say that there are 6 picas in 1 inch. And you see it saves a little bit of writing. You haven't got to write 72 pt, you can just write 6p. And occasionally you will see measurements expressed in that shorthand way. 27 points, for example, 27 pt, is equal to 2 pica 3. That means 2 picas, 24 points in total, plus 3 points on the end to make the 27. And you don't need to write the PT after that, in the same way that if someone asked you how tall you were and you said, I'm 5'10", very rarely do people say, I'm 5'10 inches, because you know what the next smallest unit of measurement is. In this movie, we're going to look at some of the character properties that we can apply and change. And to illustrate that, I'm here in Illustrator, no pun intended, and using the character panel. I've got a bunch of different text objects here. I've got 3 separate instances of what's called point text just here, and I've got an instance of some body text just here also. So let me start off by using the top and the most obvious of these things, and that's the font family that is currently in use. And if I click here on the disclosure, you can see that I can cycle through loads and loads of fonts that are installed on my system. If I choose Bodoni 72 just here, whoops, that jumped across to something else, so I'll try that again. Underneath that, I've got the variants, and this will choose other fonts from the same family group. So if I click here, it will show me that I've got book and bold italic and bold, and these are all members of the same family. In fact, if I go back to that list like so, there's a disclosure triangle just here, and if I click it, you can see them there also. So all part of the same family, just different weights and variants. The next thing I can do is change the type size, and if I click on this body text here, I'm just going to dial up this size, and simultaneously, while I dial it up, just take a look at this box here, which deals with the interlinear space or leading, and as I push that up, you'll see that's changing. Now the numbers that are inside there are in parenthesis, which means they are being set automatically by the application. And if I just push that up one more to 20, you can see this is 24, which means it's using the default of 120%. Now I can change that, of course, and override it. And if I just dial this up a bit further, you'll see that the line space there grows, and this may potentially make something easier to read. Within a few points, if you go crazy, then all you're doing is getting the eye to jump a long way between lines, but bringing it down to just something a bit over, about 140%, I think is about the maximum you'd really want to go to, then that can make it easier to read. Underneath that, in the next row, we've got kerning, and kerning is the relationship between pairs of characters. Now if we look at the word properties just here, there are a few things where their spacing isn't desperately even, such as between the T and the I just there. So I'm going to double click here to edit the text and then place my cursor between those two, and I can then dial up the kerning there to move those slightly further apart. And there you go, that's a much more agreeable spacing than it had just a moment ago. Now the reason this doesn't work exactly when I type this is because type is designed with some maths inside of it that spaces the characters out evenly, and that's generally done within a range of about 6 points to somewhere in the mid to late 50 points. Anything like this, because this type is designed for body copy, that you go over that, then those metrics, that's the way of describing them, then they kind of change. The software tries to scale them, but it doesn't always do it successfully. So whenever you're doing big type, watch out for the kerning, because the chances are you'll have to fix it yourself. The next property can be applied over a range of characters. So if I just double click or indeed triple click to select this entire line, I can change this value, which is tracking. And if I push this up, you can see that proportionally all of the character spacing here is changing. And if I pull it down to negative values, then it's getting very close and tight together. Now, there are some kerning issues appearing there at the same time, but that's how you can space out character ranges as well. And if you've got some very small type, a little bit of a positive tracking value possibly helps to make that more readable too. I'm going to skip over the next two things because, like most people who love type, they should never ever be used, and that's horizontal and vertical scaling. It's because it distorts the character shapes. So someone's gone to all of the effort of designing beautiful character shapes, and then someone comes along and just changes them. At most, maybe with the width, 1 or 2% can be considered acceptable if it's for copy fitting, but that really is about it, because you won't really notice that. Between 1 and 3, I'd say, is fairly safe. Then we've got baseline shift. If you remember from the basics of type, everything sits along a baseline, and here Illustrator's showing us that baseline. And I can actually shift that and move characters up and down, and sometimes you want to do that for a range of different reasons, but there's a control there. You can do it sometimes to make things look a bit more fun is one excuse you've got for doing it. And character rotation. Now, I don't think this appears in any of the other character boxes in the Creative Cloud applications, but Illustrator has that here. And later on, you'll discover a way that we can do this by clicking and dragging as well. Underneath that, I've got a range of different options, and these are sometimes what is known as faux, that's F-A-U-X, the French word here, fake options. Okay, and these can make changes. So if I just undo what I did there with those characters, if I just back that off just a little bit to set it back to how it was and just change the baseline back down, might take me a moment there. There we go, a few different things. In fact, do you know what? I'm just going to use the other word here just for the minute because it will take too long. If I click on this one, it converts everything to all caps, or that's if you've got an all cap variant. If you don't, it fakes it. Similarly with small caps that you may use on maybe a single line, it's kind of common to use those in formal letterhead sometimes. But again, if the small caps variant doesn't exist inside of the font, it will fake it. And you have to be very, very careful with faked characters because sometimes they don't work out as well as they'd expected further down the line if you're using this in print. Then we've got superscript and subscript. If I select this number here, for example, and click for superscript, this is the sort of thing where you might make a reference like so. It moves it up there. Again, if it doesn't have a particular glyph for that, it will fake it. And the opposite of superscript is subscript. There you go. So if you were doing a formula, it would do that. And if it has the glyph there, it will use it. If not, it will proportionally scale it. And the way you can usually tell visually, this one is an actual glyph here, I believe, because of the weight. Otherwise, they tend to look a bit thin in comparison to the rest of the text. Proportionally, of course, because they're a different size. But this one is okay. And then the last two things you've got on here, which are really desert island solutions, as I like to think of them, are underlining, like so, and you can see how that doesn't work with that baseline shifted character. If I just take that off, and strike through just there. But really, I can't think of any excuse for either of those things. And there you are. In the next movie, we're going to take a look at some paragraph level settings. It's now time for us to take a look at the paragraph level properties that we can change. And I've switched here into InDesign, and I've got a document that has some threaded text. That's the way to refer to text that goes along boxes. And in fact, you can see if I turn that on, if I show the actual text threads that are here. So I'll just go to extras and show text threads there. You can see how they link up. Like so, those arrows pointing from the outflow port, which is this thing, the bottom right hand corner, to the in port, which is the thing at the top left here of all of these frames. Okay, I'll turn that extra back off again actually, so we don't need it. It's just a distraction for the moment. And in InDesign, if I just double click here to start editing the text like so, you do get type controls up here in the control strip, or some people call it the options bar. But just to avoid any confusion or unnecessary distractions, I'm going to use the paragraph panel here as well. So the first paragraph level property we can change is its alignment. Now at the moment, this text is all left aligned. But if I change this to centered, just in this top left paragraph just here, you can see how now that all becomes centered like so. And if I click align right, then it becomes aligned to the right hand edge. I'll just set that back to left. You can sometimes hear this referred to as ragged right, and it's talking about the right edge jumping in and out like so, as it does just down there. So the next option we have is justification, and there are a few justification options available. If I click on the first one of those, it's called justification hanging left. And that means that the lines are all made so they stretch across the entire frame, but whatever's left over at the bottom sits on the left hand side. And you can also have it to the center and to the right as well, if that makes sense for you. The final option in terms of justification is force justification, or justify all lines as it's referred to here. and I urge you to think really carefully before doing that. It can be impactful over short distances, but you've really got to concentrate on getting that right. It can be very, very tricky indeed. And in fact, over a long text, it doesn't do you any favours at all. And in all of the cases with justification, you'll need to work with your hyphenation. You would never turn hyphenation off, which is something else you can do here with justified text. In fact, if I do that with forced justification and do that, you can see how there are big gaps appearing in the text here, and they're known as rivers in typographic speak. You'll also see here that I don't have to select all of a paragraph to apply any of these things, because paragraph level changes can be made just by simply clicking in the paragraph. I click at the top here and change that to centered, like so if I want to. So the next options we have relate to indents, and again, if I could stick with this top left paragraph here and set it back to ragged left just for the moment. Okay, so I've got indentation just here, this first control. If I just dial that up just a little bit, you'll see it indents that paragraph. And I've also got a first line indent, and where this is going to be useful is if I've got things like lists. Bulleted lists typically use first line indent and indentation quite heavily. You can also indent across from the right using this control here, and you have a last line indent as well should you need that. Then we've got spacing before and after. Now, spacing before is typically used in what's called an inflow subheading. So if there was a subheading introduced somewhere here, like in this particular area here, you would want it to have some spacing before the subheading so that it was obvious that you were interrupting the flow at that particular point, and also a little bit of space after as well. Space after is what you generally use on paragraphs. Now, at the moment, I've got one of the typographic crimes, which we'll deal with in a bit, in here, that I've got an extra line that's been typed in. And I'm just going to delete those lines as I'm speaking to get rid of them, because that isn't really the best way to space out your paragraphs. If I just select all of this for a second, or pretty much most of it, I'll change the space after here. And now I'm in control of the amount of spacing, and I'm not introducing any redundant characters at all. And that is the best way to space things out. If you're not having any spacing, then it's typical to indent the first line, and you might find novels that have that as well. And that's a way that you can easily distinguish between paragraphs like so. And there's nothing to stop you technically using just a tiny bit of both if it helps to make the flow easier for the reader. Then another feature that you've got here is a drop cap, and so that's the capital that drops over several lines. I'm just going to remove any indentation here from this line. Whoops, went a little bit too far on InDesign telling me off just there for doing that, so I'll just bring that down to 0 manually like so. Okay, and now I'll introduce a drop cap, and I want it to go over 3 lines, so I'll dial that up like so, and now it's doing that. And that's another way to distinguish a particular paragraph. Not usual to have it throughout the whole text, but quite often if you're doing a book at the beginning of chapters. And you can also specify a number of characters there, but bear in mind that might make for awkward breaks of a word just there. So drop caps, still a useful feature, although not used terribly much today. And there you are. Those are the basics of your paragraph alignment. In the next movie, we're going to take a look at how we go about selecting type. So how do you go about choosing the typefaces to go with your project? You're going to need to think about the subject matter itself, the audience, and also the medium. You'll find everything has its own typographic voice, as well as some expectations from an audience, although that doesn't mean you can't challenge those expectations. Let's take a look at just a few examples. So if we were doing a poster for Pop Off the Clown, this probably wouldn't be the best type to use. In fact, it looks like it's been done by his mum in Microsoft Word. It's like given up already. This one, at first, you might think, no, that's not appropriate either. But again, it depends on the subject and the audience. What if Pop Off the Clown is one of those alternate comedians at a comedy festival, in which case something like this may well be appropriate. Something like this is probably going to be a better fit if the audience is going to be the typical audience of clowns. This uses a typeface, but it's been modified to look slightly hand-drawn, and also an attempt at kind of invoking the character without actually having the character present by putting the counter of the P in red to simulate a red clown's nose. Let's look at a few more. So this is Jeff Vader, my accountant. It's not really, it's just a picture of an accountant. But do you think the typeface that's being used here would be appropriate for such a person? Probably not really, because accountants deal with very, very serious things, and you don't want to feel like you're putting your finances in the hands of a circus. Equally, an attempt at being modern like this wouldn't work either. It's just way too whimsical. What would probably be more appropriate, and I say probably because I'm not going to make the choice for you, this is something you will need to decide on yourself how you do it, but something light and modern like so with a bit of a slant maybe gives the impression that they're efficient and businesslike. Jeff, by the way, did want me to show you what a fun character he was by having this fun version of it. It's not fun really at all. But this is another example here where there's some variation, and the variation is created by two different weights of type. And contrast is an interesting thing when bringing in type. If you're working on a publication, a printed publication, then a serif-based typeface for the body copy, which will be your main concern in everything apart from magazines, where you can pretty much go for broke most of the time because they're effectively like posters as a double-page spread. But you're going to need something that has a good colour. Now, that's got nothing to do with chroma, but if you squint at it, you'll see it presents here a nice subtle greyness going down the page, and there is some variation inside there, so it's really nice colour, and of course the addition of other weights in there would work. And then you could choose something that contrasted with that typeface, such as a sans serif heading, for example. If you were doing something on a web page, then you might need to consider first of all larger type, because they're typically presented around about 3 to 6 points larger on web pages than they are in print. So something sans serif here, and possibly a serif or a slab serif heading for typical body text would work quite well, and it would sit and give again a nice colour in the page. How you choose things, of course, is entirely up to you, but one of the things you're looking for is contrast. And there's a very simple rule here. You want things that have differences. They don't have to be a sans serif and a serif, although that is a great combination. They can be differences in weight that would work as well. The simple rule to bear in mind is if you're going to have differences, go big or go home. Don't make wimpy decisions on things, because if they look too similar, then it won't work at all. But combinations entirely subjective. You need to bear in mind who's watching it, what their expectation is, whether you're challenging it, and also the medium it's presented in. Here are some guidelines that you could work to. They're general rules of thumb, really. Headlines should always be large and placed prominently on the page. Now, conventionally, that's at the top, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there. They could be down the margin or in one of the thirds. It depends what you're working on. If you're in a magazine where they have exceptions to many, many rules in the magazine world, you'll have a lot more latitude to play with it. But remember what the purpose of a headline is. It's to inform the reader and to some degree entice the reader to consume the text below. So to know what it's about and then to read it. A typeface that is not truly legible is not truly a typeface, and that is very, very true. There are some really out there, for want of a better phrase, typefaces that exist, but they're really meant for use on things like posters, maybe premises display signs and those things. where they're being used more of an image, in fact, type as an image, which is a thing, right? It's not something I'm just saying, it is actually a thing, but that's what they're there for. So don't try and use something like that in main copy, headline copy, and so on of a document, because your reader will just be confused by it. They won't consume the text, and you're defeating your own objective. Limit the number of typefaces in your document to 3 at most, and when you're starting out, cut that down to 2. In fact, try and keep it to 2 throughout the entire length of your career, unless you're doing something again in a magazine for a particular reason, or going retro circus poster or whatever. 3 is the absolute maximum. It is possible to create beautiful documents with a single typeface that has many, many fonts inside of it. So Myriad, for example, one from the Adobe type library that's installed with the Creative Cloud apps, that has several font variants inside of there with many, many weights that you could use to change your hierarchy and to make that clear, and to do all of the decoration necessary with your text. Never set the text, or body copy as it may be referred to, of a document in capitals. At most, 1 line of caps should be as far as it goes. And if you're using small caps, that's where you get proportionally scaled uppercase letters to replace the lowercase text. Only use fonts that have those actual glyph shapes in them. Many softwares actually offer ways to fake that by scaling down the capital letters to a smaller size, but it's really obvious to people who love type, and people notice far more than you think. Keep your measure between 45 and 75 characters per line. That's what the word measure means in typography. It's really all about the journey that the eye takes to read a line and skip to the next one, which is why newspapers are set into columns, so that you can skip backwards and forwards with just small movements to read the text, rather than spanning the entire width of a page. So 45 to 75 is a pretty good rule of thumb to have a decent measure of text. Readability is one of the main purposes of typography. If you're using smaller text, then use fonts that have decent X heights and use good spacing to optimize the readability of that text. Remember what we were talking about a moment or two ago in the character measure. It is all about readability. You have to look at it from the perspective of your reader and make it easy for them to consume the text, and by extension for you to achieve your objective in communication. Always think really hard about using fully justified text. That's sometimes called force justified text, and it's where the characters meet at the ends of every line. In small doses, I think that can be really, really impactful, but you need quite some skill to make it work over larger lengths of text. And what you want to avoid are the rivers. Those are the big gaps that you see appearing inside of paragraphs when the characters and the word spacings are being modified to make sure that there's a character on the far left and the far right of a column. Just think really hard about having to use that, because it can look just as awful as it can be impactful. In terms of size, body text should be between 10 and 12 points in print and 15 to 25 on the web. If I recall correctly, the browser default is 16 on there. But again, that's a good size for a reader. You don't want people squinting or straining to see text. And the spacing in between text should be at least 120% of the text size, and at most 145%. So just as an example, if we were using 10-point text, 120% of that would be 12 point as the interlinear space or leading size, and 145% would be 14.5. Just get the spacing nice. Again, it's about the transit of the eye across the text. Jumping across big gaps between lines can be just as wearing as overly long measures, and in fact it can look worse because you don't know if the things are actually related to one another. Finally, rules are made to be bent and broken. If you can justify it, if you've got a reason to do it and you believe in it, then bend and break those rules. That's how great things sometimes happen. But you always need to consider why you're doing these things. Don't just do it, and you may need to justify it to the person who pays the bill. Hi, Detective Serif here. In this movie, we're going to take a look at some of the things that are considered crimes in the world of typography and that you should try and avoid at all cost. First offender is the common amateur crime of distorted type, which has been scaled horizontally or vertically, usually perpetrated because offenders think it will fill the space better and it looks fine. It doesn't, and it doesn't. Another common offender is a double space following a period or a full stop. And this practice goes back to the days of typewriters that required monospace characters for mechanical reasons. And since the advent of proportional type in digital fonts, it's an outlaw. Avoid it. Next up is the double hyphen to indicate a break in a sentence. This is acceptable if you're typing a thank you letter to your grandmother, but if you're setting text inside of a proper document for printing or display, it's another crime. You should instead use an M- in its place. Now, some applications will automatically substitute that for you if you type a double hyphen, but otherwise you'll need to type it manually. On a Mac, that's Shift Option hyphen, and on Windows you can try one of these two things: Alt Control minus, although the minus has to be from the numeric keypad, or hold down the Alt key and type 0151, and that will get you the correct character. Here's the next crime. In some places, you may decide to use Roman type in a vertical orientation. And these characters were never designed to be stacked. Now, if you're typing in Chinese, that's fine because the characters are designed to support that pretty much. But if you feel you must do it, then use caps or small caps, as that at least makes it look more solid. The last one is what I like to call at-fat. All the fonts, all the time. Unless you're creating retro gig or vintage theatrical posters, limit your usage to 3 fonts at most in a project, and ideally 2. As mentioned elsewhere in this chapter, it's best to use font families that support a range of weights to add variation than switch fonts. Now, there are a host of other things considered transgressions by serious type aficionados, but you'll get to those as you learn more and get deeper into the topic. Just try and stay clear of those type crimes for now, alright? Now, while we're on the subject of crimes, I would like just to take a moment to talk about font licensing and where you get fonts from, as it's a very important concern and you could potentially end up on the wrong side of the actual law. The best advice I can give you in regards to obtaining fonts is purchase them from a reputable source such as MyFonts, FontShop, Linotype and others. Be very wary of cheap and free websites. We should all know that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and what you might be getting may be more than you bargained for. Often, wrongdoers use fonts to hide malicious code that could wreak havoc with your computer and possibly even worse. They may also be redistributing software that actually belongs to someone else. Fonts are always licensed. You do not own them, and they are a piece of software with an end-user license agreement. And you might be surprised to know that in certain countries, illegally sharing fonts is actually a criminal act with severe penalties. It's so important that when you package a document from the Adobe Creative Cloud applications, you'll get this warning just to remind you of your obligations in law, and Adobe don't want to be your unwitting accomplice. If you are a Creative Cloud subscriber, then you'll have access to thousands of fonts that sync to your desktop, and you can have quite a large number, I think it's about 100, and just unsync the ones you're not using, all via Typekit. That's great news for your pocket and for your peace of mind, especially if you're just starting out and money is tight. Creative Cloud will always ask you if you don't have a font installed, and if it's from Typekit, to automatically sync it for you too. So you don't need to keep quite so many synced all the time. Just be very careful what you do with things from sites that say they're free, or also from accepting font software for other people if you're not processing the document. This chapter looks at the final element of the foundations of graphic design, colour. And what we're looking at right now is where we begin our exploration with the components of colour. This is a colour wheel, and you may well have come across this one in school. It's called the pigment wheel, but it's also often referred to as the artist's colour wheel. And it's very useful for understanding the relationships and mixes of pigment-based paints and inks. Now, even though what we make as designers may well be finally produced using inks, the pigment wheel has limited use for us a lot of the time, and there are other colour wheels. So we're going to be using one here that you may be slightly less familiar with, that's based on digital colour to help you develop your colour knowledge. Now, the first component of colour we're going to look at is hue, which is to most people the name of a colour, such as orange or rose or spring green or azure. In digital colour, hues are identified by their position on the colour wheel, starting with red at 0 degrees and then moving counterclockwise around the wheel. So orange would be at 30 degrees, spring green at 150 degrees, azure would be at 210 degrees, and rose all the way around almost at 330 degrees. The next component is saturation. And so in addition to the wheel, let's take a yellow orange to focus on, maybe about 5 degrees further round the colour wheel than the previous one we were using. And we'll introduce this slider, which will change our saturation. Although you may also hear that referred to as chroma or intensity. All of those terms are correct. Now, at the moment, our slider's just at the 50% mark, which is kind of like neutral, and although there's a much greater range possible in practice, we will call it halfway for this demonstration. So if we pull that slider down, you can see that it's desaturating the colours, making them much less intense as we move down that scale, in fact turning them to greys. Now let's push it the other way, and you'll see some of the colours in this wheel have kind of maxed out and achieved their maximum saturation. We'll take that back to the starting point now and introduce another slider for our final component of colour, which is tone, or sometimes referred to as value, which is the relative value, brightness, or perhaps more scientifically, luminosity of a colour. If we reduce the brightness, this is where we get our shades, just as adding black to a colour would in the world of pigments. And if we increase the brightness, this is where we get our tints. Of course, similarly in the real world with pigments and paints, that would be like adding white paint to a tin of colour like so. The absolutes at both ends would lead to a total absence of colour at either end, one being completely black and the other white. So there you are. It's by shifting those three components together that we end up with the enormous array of colours that are available to us. In addition to hue, saturation and tone or value, you're going to also need to be able to identify warm against cool colours. Let's have a look at that right now in this movie. So here we have this ring of different hues. Now, if I warm those colours up progressively towards the centre of this diagram, you can see how that changes the values of the colours, especially if you look at the greens and blues on the left hand side. On the right hand side, a couple of those colours max out pretty quickly because, to be honest, red, magenta, orange, all pretty hot to start off with, and red about as hot as you can get in terms of colour. Going the other way now towards the outside of the slide here, adding blue makes colours cooler, and again you can see where this is more prominent in the display of these colours here. You might also notice that the warmer colours appear to move more towards you, and the cooler colours appear to be set back, and that's just a characteristic of warm and cool colours, that they advance or recede. Something else we can look at here is when we take colour away. So if I switch over now to this colour image, beautiful mountain image here, and then remove the colour from that totally, we've got a monochromatic image, or here a monotone, whichever way you want to look at it, but the tone or the chroma in this particular value happens to be black. Now, there are other ways of representing monochrome images. You can use any colour for monochrome. Here, if I switch out to a Pantone colour, I've got this warm grey, that's the same image there, and you can see how that's presented. You can also produce tonal images mixing your own inks and get some interesting results. So if I add to the Pantone warm grey here black as well, I've now got what's called a duotone, and some of the tones in this image are tinted with the Pantone and the really deep shadows are tinted with the black, and you can see hopefully how that's changed the dynamic range of this picture. Tritones, if I add another colour, I'll add a sort of a yellow colour here this time, so I've got this Pantone 135, and again that's changed the values in the picture completely. And finally, a quad tone here, so 4 different tones, and I've chosen to use blue 277 here, and these are all really arbitrary choices. I just wanted to choose 3 different things to present this. You could have infinite variations of this, of course. But there you go. Those are the other concepts you need to get your head around. So warm and cool colours, and also tonal images, including monotones, duotones, tritones and quad tones. Sounds like a band I should be in. As a designer, you're going to need to get to grips with how colours work together, and fortunately there's an awful lot of groundwork being done for you over the centuries. When I was a student, it was all about Johannes Itten, whose work continues to influence design, and of all things in the cosmetics industry, strangely enough to this very day. He's attributed with creating the seasonal colour analysis, and his work on the interaction of colours was actually a direct influence on the op art movement of the 60s, or it started in the 60s at any rate. A while before, well, about 150 years if I recall correctly, although to be honest I wasn't there, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's theory of colours discussed the nature of colours and our perception of them, rather than the science of wavelength theory, which had been established well before that. It just goes to show what you can do, actually, without the distractions of Facebook and Twitter, although I bet if Instagram would have been around, he'd have been all over that. Anyway, joking aside, there are several ways you can create harmonious colour combinations, and just before we get there, let's refresh our knowledge on colour mixing, and for that we're going to use the pigment wheel here. So you probably know that the pure colours cannot be created by mixing any other colours, and they are, in pigment world, red, yellow and blue. Then we have our secondary colours, which on the wheel are actually 60 degrees from those, and that's where we mix red and yellow and blue and red together to get our oranges, our purples and our greens and so on. Separated by 30 degrees in both directions from those are our tertiary colours, and those are created by mixing a secondary with another primary. So for example, your orange could become more red and your purple more violet and so on. There you go, all exciting stuff, and thanks for bearing with that. So every harmonic rule starts with a base colour, and in every instance here we're going to be using red as the base colour, and the swatches underneath the wheel are going to show you what the rule would reproduce, although there are tonal and temperature variations available too, which usually are expressed towards the centre of the wheel and sometimes in another direction also. But just to keep it simple, we'll assume that we're okay with knowing that. So the first harmony we're looking at here is monochromatic, and we looked at monochrome images in the previous movie, so you'll know they're all based on a single hue with variations in value. Now I'm using the example here from Illustrator, and what this does is it uses tint value to create that rule. It has another one called shades, which uses shade values, as you can see just there, so the addition of black to those colours. Complementary rules, which are one of the fundamental rules and used heavily in design actually, are opposites on the colour wheel. You will find some variations at either side of the 180 degrees that a complement gives you. You'll find things called split complements and left complements and so on, but these are things you can investigate later. Analogous rules use hues from around about 30 degrees either side of the base colour, so they're picking things that are similar in hue spread out around that central colour, and there are variants on those too, as there are with many of the rules that you're seeing here. A triad harmony has hues separated by 120 degrees, and a tetrad has them separated by 90 degrees. A pentagram uses 5 increasing distances around the wheel to generate its harmony. They're not all equal as you'd expect around there. Now, those things are all, of course, very, very useful, and they will help you with choosing colours for your projects that work together really well. But there are 2 colour models that you absolutely must understand, and that's where we're going in the next movie. In this movie, we're going to investigate the difference between the RGB and the CMYK colour models, and I thought we'd have a little bit of fun with it. Let's do a scenario, a role game in which you and 2 of your friends have been sent out to a world in deepest, darkest space to investigate a phenomenon that's been found there. It's this giant black obelisk, as you can see in front of you. It's not doing anything, it's just there, but you reach out and touch it, and suddenly all the lights go out. And there you are. There is no light energy. Total and complete darkness. Now, it just so happens that you have got a torch with you, and you turn that on and you find out that your torch emits pure red light. And you can see in the middle where it's the strongest that the light is its maximum intensity, and that's as red can be. And as it falls off to the edges, it gets progressively darker. One of your friends turns on their torch and intersects it with yours, and it turns out they've got a green torch. And again, at maximum intensity, you can just see pure green light, and it falls off to the edges, getting darker. Where the 2 overlap, you get yellow light, and the varying tones of fall off give you some additional colours in there as well. And your final friend turns on their torch, which happens to be blue. And you notice that when their torch crosses over with your torch, you get magenta. And when their torch crosses over with your other friend's torch, you get cyan. And in the middle, you get pure white light. The maximum combined energy of those 3 light sources gives you white light. And that's how RGB works. It's an additive model where the maximum strength of all of those things added together gives you white. It's an energy-based model. If you pulled the plug out of the monitor right now that you're watching this on, or turned the device off, the screen would jump back to black. No energy passing through it. So CMYK, we get transported into a different world, a world starting with white paper. And on our white paper, we add some cyan. And that cyan subtracts from the reflected light that you're seeing from the paper. And you can see it changes, and there's some cyan. And now we add some magenta. And that again is subtracting from the paper white. You're changing the density or the wavelength of the light as it moves through it. And where they overlap, you get blue. And when we add yellow, then mixes occur between all three, just as with RGB, but now we get green between yellow and blue, so very similar to the pigment model. We get red between yellow and magenta, and we get a blue between magenta and cyan, and you can see it's almost the opposite of the RGB model. And in the middle, we get a weak, low-density black, and we could actually add some black ink to that to thicken that up. Okay, so you can see they're very similar, they're related, but sort of opposite. Not completely, but kind of. Let's have a look at that in a real-world printed scenario simulation. Here are 4 colour plates, a cyan, a magenta, a yellow and a black plate. And I'm being a bit hard on you actually by showing you them as they actually are. So let's introduce some colour across these. So there you go. This is a simulation, but this is the cyan, magenta, yellow and black plates as they'd print. So let's put them on a piece of paper. So we get some paper and add our cyan ink like so. That's how that gets printed. And then we add magenta, and you can see where those two things are mixing together and also where they're in isolation. Now we'll add the yellow plate, and you can see in places how that's approaching a weak, low density black in a few places. And then we add the black plate. The K, by the way, stands for key because it keys all of the colours up, gives it a point of reference, and your eyes then interpret that as a colour image. And so there you are. That's RGB, an energy-based model, additive adding together, and CMYK, a pigment-based model that is subtracting from the whiteness you already have of the paper. And hopefully you now understand that. In the next movie, we're going to look at something called spot colours. As designers, the largest range of achievable colours we have to work with is the RGB model, and we refer to that achievable range as a gamut. What you're looking at here is a very rough approximation of the map of colours that human eyes could perceive. And of those colours, the generic RGB range is roughly about this much. That's what we can achieve with our current technology and components. Now you might remember from the previous movie that RGB is based on energy, and that CMYK is almost completely opposite, as it's actually subtracting light from the paper as it's reflected to your eyes. So that gamut is even smaller than the RGB spectrum. When we're using those super bright colours in our projects, they are maybe going to work just fine for the digital world, but in the CMYK process, all of that nice bright red, super jazzy green and several other colours of the RGB model can't be achieved using CMYK at all. The image you're looking at now, the word and the bar at the bottom are RGB. The topmost bar is an approximation of CMYK. And I say approximation because you're seeing it projected to your eyes as different wavelengths of energy. On paper, this would be a bit darker, as you can see. So if we just switch that over, you can see now that all of the colours here have shifted. The RGB bar is still at the bottom. And we'll just go back to the super bright RGB version for a second. And I just want you to think how much of that colour would remain unchanged by conversion to CMYK. Well, here you are. This is an illustration of that. It's not very much at all, is it? But we see what we want to see, and it's relative, our perception. We kind of do some magic in our eyes to see the colours we want to see. It's only when you see them compared to super bright things do you notice the difference. So sometimes the gamut needs to be extended, or a colour that exists completely outside of it needs to be used, and this is actually often the case with brands who aim for a distinct colour. When I was producing work for fast-moving consumer goods, which has been a considerable chunk of my career, part of the process was to visit the printers and colour check to make sure under 3 different lighting conditions that the colours looked right, because people notice that and you'd be surprised what people actually do pick up on. So to those ends, either extending a gamut or printing an out of gamut colour, we use specially mixed inks known as solids or specials. They're known as solids because, unlike the CMYK inks, which are printed in a mosaic pattern of dots to create an optical illusion, the extra inks are normally laid over as solid blocks. Pantone is one such library of colours, and these specially made inks that you may well have heard of, because their inks use over a dozen different pigments, and they've got a reputation for colour consistency that they're justifiably very proud of. We can use inks from libraries like that to produce solid colours that may represent a brand, or they could also be used to extend the range of CMYK by overprinting with a translucent overlay of the special ink, and it's referred to as bumping or touch on a plate to extend the range of CMYK. And I've attempted to simulate that here with the orange. This is an orange that would more or less print in CMYK. Of course, you're watching it on a screen, but we could add an overlay to extend that range and make it really, really bright. Here it looks slightly redder than it would do, but I'm sure you get the idea. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that these colours add a significant cost to any print job too. The inks are expensive, and the process of getting them into the machine, which has to be completely cleaned, right, and used and then completely cleaned again afterwards. Just check out with your stakeholders before you go specifying them. We don't want anybody getting any surprises with the print bill. In many, if not all cultures in the world, colours have symbolic associations. Let's take, for example, red. To many of us in the West, it's the colour of heat, warning and danger. It's also the colour of passion, anger, love and courage. But red is considered a lucky colour in China, the colour of a heroic figure in Japan, the colour of joy, energy and creativity to Hindus, yet the colour of mourning and representative of death in some parts of Africa. In the UK, as well as being the most striking colour of the ceremonial uniform of our most visible soldiers at Buckingham Palace, red is the colour of pillar boxes where we post our mail. But for my friends in the US, their mail gets posted in a blue box. Perhaps you can see where research in the early stages of the creative process is essential. You should consider if any of these associations would have an impact on your design. I think that sometimes red is just red after all. It's all down to the context in which it's employed. Don't forget though, you can change the effect of its interpretation by using a shade or a tinted value. This colour scheme is disastrous, and what's more, I've done it on purpose. It's to illustrate something in design that is sadly often overlooked. Colour vision deficiency, or CVD for short, is a way of describing the three forms of colour blindness that affect 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women worldwide. It's especially important to consider this if you're using colour as information, such as on maps of locations or in documents or websites. You should never use colour alone to convey information, such as click the red button or tap the green tab, and you should instead use text in addition to the colour or icons if you're trying to avoid a language dependency. I'm here in Illustrator for this particular example, although all of the Adobe Design apps support this check. And what I'm going to do is go up to the View menu and come down to my Proof Setup, and you'll see here that I've got profiles for protanopia and deuteranopia, which are the two most common forms of colour blindness. If I go for protanopia first, which is the second most common, you can see how these things change. Now there's plenty of contrast there, and even colourblind people can detect contrast, so that's a good thing, but there is plenty here for that. Let me switch out to deuteranopia here, and suddenly it's a different picture completely. And what they've got to do now is to struggle to actually see the word chocolate on there, so it might be worth a rethink in terms of the colour. If I was absolutely certain though these were the colours I wanted to use, it would be an idea for me to introduce something else to help make this more contrasty if I could. And what I've got here, if I select this word And here in the appearance panel, I've got a drop shadow that's currently turned off. And you can see now how that adds enough contrast for that to be able to be decoded fairly quickly. If I switch it back and turn my proof colors off, then you'll see it in the original color scheme. Inclusiveness in design is very important, and it's worth noting that in many cases legislation is in place to ensure that differently abled people are given the same access to information, content and services as everyone else. Some of those considerations, such as structural markup in web pages and audio descriptions of images and content, may be outside of your role and more the domain of usability and accessibility testers. But this check for colour blindness is something that you are able to perform, and my recommendation is that you do. If you've never visited Photoshop before or have only dipped in here or there, this will be your orientation to the interface, with just enough information so that you can work along with the exercises in this chapter. Let's start off with the top level menu system, which here on the Mac is pinned to the top of the screen. On Windows, you'll find that at the top of the screen also, but in what is known as the application bar for the program. Beneath that, we have the options bar, although some people call this the control strip as well, because that's how it's known in Illustrator and InDesign. You can, of course, choose it whatever you like, and I'll try to remember to refer to it both ways throughout. What is important for you to know, though, is that this area is contextual and will change depending on what is selected. In Photoshop, that's always associated with the current tool. And on that note, this is where you'll find the tools. Now, don't worry if your toolbox looks slightly different to this one. Some folks like to have the toolbox in 2 columns instead of the long strip I have here, but the same tools are there. And wherever possible, I'll be telling you a key to press on your keyboard to access the tool that we're using, or you'll see it on an overlay or both. On the opposite side of the screen is where you will find the panels. Now, sometimes they may be collapsed down to icons, as is the case here with the Creative Cloud Libraries icon. But they're easy to access. If you just click on the icon, they will expand out like so. Now, it's worth us taking a little bit more of a detailed look at the panel, as they've got some characteristics that you might need to know about. So first of all, we've got the panels tab, and you can do a few things with that. If you double click it, it will collapse, and if it's collapsed, double clicking it should make it expand, and that's very helpful sometimes when you still want the panel around but it's taking up too much of your available screen real estate. Across from that, at the top right, this is where you access a panel's flyout menu, and it gives you access to other commands associated with the panel itself and often with the things that you're working on. At the foot of the panel, you'll find icons associated with the most essential commands that the panel deals with usually. If you can't find a panel, it will be hanging out with its buddies up in the top level menu system in the window menu. And to wrap up this movie, that's where we're going to go right now. So what we're going to do here, for the best experience for all of us, or at least so we have more or less the same experience, I'd like you to click on the window menu, come down to the workspace option, and if it says Essentials Default already, then just choose Reset Essentials from the menu, and that will reset it back to the shipping default, and then it will look similar to the one we've got. We'll just change that momentarily. If it doesn't say Essentials, then go back to the window menu, back into there, choose Essentials, and then reset it. So the things that we're going to do here, just to make sure we all look the same, is we're going to drag the Libraries tab out like so. Okay, just release it over the document area for the moment, and then drag it back, and you'll notice this blue line appearing, and that's places that you can dock it to. We're going to dock it just here underneath the history icon, which is what that small icon with the arrow is. Once you've done that, we're all set and ready to go. The only thing you need to know about next is saving a PSD, and from there we can get started. Now that you've had your basic orientation to the Photoshop interface, it's time for us to create the file that we'll be using throughout this chapter to develop a few basic Photoshop skills. If we go to the File menu and choose New, then if you have this kind of dialog, choose from the Print profile A4. If you can't see A4 there, click on the View All Presets and it will be inside of the list there. Otherwise, in the dialog that you have, enter the values of 210mm wide, 297mm high at 300 pixels per inch in RGB color at 8-bit. With a white background, whatever color profile you have will be just fine, I'm sure, and square pixels. If you're happier in an alternate set of units, then you can change that just here, but I'll be giving all of my directions in millimeters for this exercise. Hit create and your file is ready. What we're going to do though is save it straight away so we can add to this and build out a file throughout the chapter. So once again, up to the File menu, you'll need to choose Save As and then find a location for the file. I'm going to go out to my desktop and create a new folder, and I'll call this PS Exercise, like so, and then save this as massif add.psd. We'll use the Photoshop format because it's widely accepted not only by Creative Cloud applications but by some others as well. And as we're going to have layers in here and other things like layer masks and type layers, it makes sense for us to use that format. So choose Save, and that's it. We're ready to move on to the next exercise. In this movie, we're going to use the basic selection tools to select a couple of items from this image and turn them into new files. This file is old background TIFF, and if you have access to it, then you can work along with me. If not, any file of your own will do, of course. You might notice my interface has changed slightly. That's because I've gone into one of Photoshop's other view modes here to make it easier for people on smaller screens to get the most out of the image. Although everything you've seen in the orientation is still here, so don't worry about that. So the first thing we need to do is to zoom in on the two logos in the bottom right hand corner, because it's those that we'll be picking up. And I wish I could say this was a fictitious scenario, that you've got a flat image that you need to pull logos out of. But if I had £1 for every time I've actually done this in real life, I could at least buy myself a nice new jacket, I would have thought by now. So to zoom in, if you tap the Z key on your keyboard, that will get you the zoom tool, which is at the bottom of the toolbox just over here. And if I can just stop myself from scrolling. So take the zoom tool over to the middle of the two logos, just here, I'm between the two. Then mouse down and drag just a short way and then stop, because you'll find out you'll zoom in very, very quickly. If you've gone too far, just hold down the Alt or Option key and click a couple of times until you've got a zoom level like I have here. I'm now going to pan to make this more comfortable to see, and you do that by holding down the space bar. That gives you temporary access to the hand tool from the toolbox, and then just drag the image to wherever is comfortable for you on your screen and release the space bar. So the first tool we're going to use is the rectangular marquee tool. It is usually the default tool in Photoshop, and if you tap M on your keyboard, that should access it. Just have a look at the toolbox here in the second icon down. If it looks like this rectangle, then you're set. If not, long press, and this will give you access to that entire family of tools. But seeing as we've already got the rectangular marquee tool now, let's move over to the black logo down at the bottom here. Try and position your cursor on the top left corner of the black rectangle, mouse down, and in one motion drag across to the diagonally opposite corner and release like so. I'm just going to hold down the spacebar here and pan up slightly so it's more easy for you to see what I've got. So now that I have that selection, what I'm going to do is copy that. So Command C, Control C to copy, and then we're going to create a new image based on this file. If you do Command N, Control N, then the new document dialog will open, and you will most likely see clipboard here as a preset or a recent file. I know it isn't recent, but you'll see one anyway. Double click on that to create a brand new file and then paste in that logo, Command V, Control V, if you want to paste it in. And this introduces a new layer, and we're going to leave it that way so it has its layers and it will save nicely as a Photoshop document with those. So just as we did in the previous movie, go to the File menu and choose Save, and then into the folder that you've created for your exercise, just call this one Massive Rectangle Logo, like so. Once you've done that, if you get the Maximize Compatibility dialog, hit OK. That means it's more compatible with several other Adobe applications. They'll understand the format. And then close it by using the shortcut Command W, Control W, or going to the File menu and choosing Close. Back in the main file here, let's change the view so we can see this roundel. Now ellipses are always slightly more tricky to select. So what I do is I make a larger ellipse than I need, and then I transform the selection down. Let's go over to the toolbox and long press on the marquee selection tool here, the rectangular marquee tool, and choose the elliptical marquee tool. Then just come up to a region about here. I'm on the left hand side, I'm a little way above, and then mouse down and drag across like so. Get a much bigger shape than you actually need. Now you can reposition this. If you take your cursor inside that area there, you can actually move the selection around, and it's up to you if you actually want to do that or not. But what I'm going to do next is transform it. So if we go to the Select menu in the top level menu system, you'll see that Transform Selection is about 3/4 of the way down. And when you choose it, you get this box around. All we need to do now is to drag these handles in the middle of each side down to the maximum edge of the ellipse. And as you do so, the selection will be transformed. Now don't worry if it doesn't look the right shape at the moment or meet the edges. It will do as soon as you get the last one into place. And once you've done that, simply double click or hit the tick in the control strip or options bar to commit the selection. And then again, we'll copy this, Command C, Control C, create a new document. It will say clipboard again, only with the dimensions that you've got here, and then paste. And once more, save this as a Photoshop file. So File, Save, go into your folder that you've set aside for this, and do this as Massive Roundel as a PSD, and you're done. Move on to the next exercise. So all we need to do now is just close up this file, which we can do from the File menu, or use the shortcut Command W or Control W on a PC. The selection doesn't add anything to the file's data, so you can just close without saving. So here we are back in our main file, and what we're going to do in this exercise is we're going to bring in a couple of other images as assets. You can bring in other things such as Illustrator files and so on. There's quite a few things you can bring in actually, but we're just going to stick to images for this. Let's make our way up to the File menu, and you'll see there are two place commands here. Place embedded, which goes to another file and brings all of its data into this file, or place linked, which we'll be using this time around, which actually creates just an additional kind of placed copy in here, and we can do things to change its appearance, but we can't change any of the actual pixels. And it's a very, very clever way to work if you're trying to keep maximum editability. So we'll choose that command and make our way out to the exercise files for chapter 5 and bring in Blue Mountains PSD. If we double click on that, that will come in like so. It has a transformation frame around it, and of course we'd want to keep its proportions. We don't want any distortion. Now you can go to one of the corner handles like so, and holding down the shift key to keep proportions, change the size like that. But there's another way you can work with this as well. If I just undo what I did there, Command Z, Control Z on the PC, come up to the control strip at the top here and click this link to maintain the aspect ratio. You can then use what I like to call stapler accident finger. If you go over the H character there for height, you'll see the cursor changes to a finger with arrows projecting from it. What that means is if you mouse down and drag in the directions indicated, you can change the associated value. So my mouse button is down and I'm just dragging to the right here. I'm doing it very slowly and you'll see that it's increasing the size of that image. And I'm actually going to go quite big on this. So I'm going to go up to about 85%. There you go, 84.30%. That's of the original file size, by the way, not the size in here. I'm then going to drag this down like so, and I think I went a bit overboard there actually, so I'm going to just scale that down slightly again. So I'll go to 79.3 just there. I'm hitting all the 0.3s and just down just a shade further. Let's have a look. That's about exactly where I want it really, around about the 77 mark just there. And once you're happy, you've got a few different options for how you commit this. You can click the tick at the top, you can hit return on your keyboard or enter, or you can double click inside the transformation frame. Excellent. We're going to place one more file. So if we go up to the file menu, and this time we'll choose to place another linked asset. So if we go place linked, and we'll bring in backpack JPEG from there. So if we bring that in, that comes again with its own transformation handles, but we're going to leave that as it is at the moment. Just double click in there and we'll catch up in the next movie where we're going to make a simple selection based on color. In this movie, we're going to make a simple selection based on color, because to isolate this backpack from the background using the simple tools such as the rectangle and the ellipse, that would take quite a while. There is a tool called the lasso here which you can do by freehand dragging, but even that, it would take too long to do. So we're going to use an older tool. It's been in Photoshop for like ever in here, and it's the Magic Wand tool, which some people deride, but it's actually very good at selecting good solid colors, which is what we've got here. Now you might be looking at the backpack and thinking, no, we haven't, but I'm not looking at the backpack. I'm looking at its surroundings. It's the path of least resistance there. So all you need to do here, look at the top here, you can see it's got a tolerance value. 32 is fine. That gives it different levels around white to select. But click on the white and you'll see it picks up pretty much most of that white. Now inside of the enclosed areas, it's not getting those. And what we could do, if we just deselect that, go select, deselect, just here at the top, or Command D, Control D, turn off contiguous, that means neighboring pixels, and then click, and you'll see we've selected the white in the small gaps. However, we have also selected it on this metal item just here, which we don't want to do. So let's deselect that again, select, deselect, turn contiguous back on, click in the main background. What you can then do is hold down the Shift key and click into the areas here, just under the headrest. You can come down and click in this region here, just next to the zipper. And you can come and click into these eyes here at the ends of the straps. Now, if you can't see exactly where to click, what you can do is just hit your caps lock key to turn that on, and it turns it into a crosshair, which is slightly more precise. Hold down Shift and it adds to that selection like so. However, we don't want the background, we want the backpack, so we need to flip that out. And the way to do it is to go to the Select menu and choose inverse, and it then swaps it out for us. We don't need to worry too much about these edges here that are still selected. That's just fine. What we're going to do is pop up to this feature, select and mask, and we're just going to refine this selection. So first of all, go to the view menu and make sure you've got onion skin showing here, and then you can change the transparency using this slider. If we take that up quite high, it's very easy to see where there are slight halos around the backpack, and we can use a couple of controls here to fix that. First of all, we can add a bit of radius, which gives Photoshop some area around the main selection to work. We can turn on Smart Radius here, very handy for when you're making hair selections, and we'll be doing that in the next movie, but also useful for where you've got transitional edges here. And then we're going to turn up the contrast in the global selections region, and we're also going to bring the edge in just a shade, only a bit, just about 10 or 14% there in that sort of region. I'm going to make that a bit more contrasty, so I pushed that the wrong way actually. There we go. That's much better, much more contrasty. Perfect. With that, the only thing we need to do now is to output this to a layer mask, which we'll be talking about at the beginning of the next movie, but for now you can click OK. Your backpack is ready to be used, so we'll just transform the size down. So Edit, Free Transform. You'll get another transformation frame. Hold down the Shift key on your keyboard, mouse down on one of the corners and drag downwards, or use the technique described earlier, and then just hit the tick or return. Do a quick save on your work, and then we'll move on to the next step. So in the previous movie, we refined a selection and we output that to a layer mask. So what is a layer mask? Well, here's one down here in the layers panel. It's attached to the current layer here, and you can see there's a whole lot of black in there with some areas of white. And here's a simple rhyme for you to remember: black to conceal, white to reveal. So wherever in the mask there is white, you can see the contents of the layer. Wherever there's black, it's obscured. Okay, you can even paint inside the mask. The only thing you need to be aware of is to make sure that it's highlighted like so with these borders. You see, if I click on the layer, if I painted now, that paint would add to the layer. If I click on the mask, then I'm working in the mask. If I just get my brush tool here, B for the brush tool, I'm just going to choose a really simple brush from up the top here. Yours might vary from what I've got here. If I choose a brush here, and you can change your size either with this selector here or using the bracket keys on your keyboard. The right bracket makes it larger, the left bracket makes it smaller. Okay, and I'm just going to paint down this area here. Now, can you see what's happening there? There's white being added on there, or you would think so. It's not, it's that I'm painting with white, and white reveals. So I'm just going to undo that, Command Z. I need to come over here and swap my colors over. You can do that with the X key, by the way, if you want to become a shortcut ninja. And then I can just paint down, and you can see that that line that was there a moment ago, that's disappearing. In fact, if I was using a brush at a slightly lower opacity, and there you go, there we are. And I can just brush down those edges, and away goes all of that extra content. You can see here there's some small dots in that area there showing content through. So I'm going to get the lasso tool here and make a very, very crude selection, because that's what this tool is actually for. And then I'm going to fill that with black. If I go to the edit menu and choose fill, down to content aware, and change that to foreground color, because black is the foreground color at the moment, hit OK, you can see those white gaps have disappeared on the mask. I can now deselect that. So let's place another image. This time we're going to place an embedded image. We're going to bring in all the data. So choose Place Embedded from the File menu. And from the exercise files, choose Climb a PSD and then resize this. So I'm going to use my Photoshop skills up here for transforming. So I've clicked on the lock there, and then I'm going to use Stapler Accident Finger, or Scrubby Sliders as they're called, or Scrubby Dragging, to just make this a lot larger like so. And then I'm going to reposition that down to about there. I think that's a pretty good composition for that. double click to apply it, and then over to the toolbox. If you tap W on your keyboard, it will get you in the right region. Long press on the magic wand and choose the quick select tool, because selecting this walker or climber using that tool would take ages. But with the quick select tool, all you need to do is stay away from the edges, just brush downwards like so, and you'll see that very quickly your selection grows as the quick select tool analyzes the surrounding pixels. Don't go to the edges of the hair, stay away from that, just get the main body of the hair. Now go up to select a mask as we used in the previous movie. So choose that, and again make sure that you've got onion skin on, because there are a range of different ways you could preview this. We're going to dial in a little bit of a radius. If you want to, you can click show edge up here and then dial up your radius, and you'll actually get a preview of the radius that Photoshop will be using to analyze. I'm going to go for something quite big just here, about sort of maybe not as big as that, maybe down to about 15 pixels there. Turn on Smart Radius and it will deal with the edges slightly differently. You can now turn off Show Edges, and that's done a pretty good job of improving that straight away. If I drop down the transparency slightly here, you can see where those fine hairs are out to the side. We're not going to use the global controls. We're going to use this, the Refine Edge brush, over on the left hand side. You need a brush that's not too big and not too small, so I'd say around about this sort of size, just a bit larger than the edge, and then just brush on the edge. Don't brush into the main body of the hair, and then brush around the woolly cap just there, because there'll be little strands of hair there, and just down into this region here, and actually just on that edge just there. It'd be a good shot there, I think. Perfect. Let's push up that transparency on the side here, and that's done a pretty good job of refining that selection. Now the hairs here look a bit thick and dark. What we need to do is kind of decontaminate those colors, and that's something we can do here in the output settings. As soon as we choose it, it will jump to creating a new layer with a layer mask, and if we hit OK, you'll see that it's turned off our existing layer, but it's kept it, so we've damaged nothing in doing this, and we've got a mask attached to this, and that hair blends pretty well with the background. Very quick, very good heel there. I think I'm just going to remove this layer here, so I'm just going to click on it to make it active, and then hit the trash there to get rid of it. We don't need it. In the next movie, let's change some colors. Okay, so we've been moving along nicely, and in the previous movie we made a selection that involved hair and managed to get through that okay, but what we need to do now is change a color, because it so turns out that purple is the color of our main competitor for our backpack client. So we need to kind of deal with that. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to make that layer active, because there's a chance if you did exactly what I did in the previous movie that it won't be active. So you click on a layer, and that way Photoshop knows which layer to work on. And we're then going to go up to the select menu and come down and choose this command, color range, and a dialog will open. It may or may not go black. I've got a pretty good selection there, funny that. But what you need to do is just come along here and choose none. Just in case you're wondering why mine went black, it's because the first thing it looks for is the foreground color, and my foreground color when I'm not painting in a mask is this color, which is very close to that magenta, just so you know. So inside this dialog, what we have to do is we identify in our image the color we want to select, and we start off by just clicking once in a fairly representative area of that color. Now our mask here shows us what we're picking up at the moment, just a small edge there, and on the what would be her left hand, and a bit here where I clicked. But we need to add some tones to that. I don't need to add too many, but if you hold down Shift, there is a set of tools here to add and subtract, by the way, but it's easier if you can to hold down Shift. And so I can see down here there should be some selected, so I'll just click in that region there and just along here and then just up towards the top here, and you can see the selection's growing, but it's not very easy to work that out between those two things. So we've got something that can help us. We've got a couple of different mattes here that can work. If we chose white matte, for example, we'd get a white mask showing through, but I don't think that one's very helpful for this image. So I'm going to choose a black matte, and that's now much easier to see. And you can hopefully see just at the top of the first index knuckle here, that's not selected. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, that bit's really important, and click in that region, and suddenly that selection has improved no end. I think that's pretty good. One last tweak, and that's to come up here to the fuzziness slider, and you see if I drag this away a bit, right, like so, that it improves the selection. You may also start to pick up other bits of the image, and that's when you back off, but I like to go right the way out to extremes, like so, and then back off until everything disappears apart from the stuff that I want. Once we've done that, hit OK, and now you have that as a selection. And what we're going to do is use a layer adjustment to change this color. So come over to the right hand side where all of your panels are, and you should find adjustments just there. If not, go to the window menu and choose adjustments from that menu. And in the rows here, we're going to go for the first item on the second row. And that creates us a hue saturation adjustment layer. Click on that and your properties panel will open, and you'll get some representations of the color wheel in flat form. So what we're going to do is drag the hue across, and you can see how the color changes. And I'm going to go for a fairly dark orange. Yeah, not quite that dark. I'm just going to push back a little bit there. You can change the saturation. Very rarely do you need to change the lightness, and in fact I advise that most of the time you stay away from that. Just going to drop the saturation slightly, maybe push that hue just a bit further back. I'm just trying to make some variation there. Brilliant. Happy with that. The only thing is that will actually be affecting areas underneath this layer if this layer mask wasn't active. And what you could do to make that a certainty is just click this icon here, and that clips that adjustment so it only directly affects the selected layer underneath. There you go, doing really well. Let's have a look at what's coming along in the next movie. So in this movie, the first thing we're going to experience here is something that's unfortunately all too common in the world of graphic production, in that there's going to be a change. So our client has decided they no longer want this woman here in front. They want another shot that they've provided. So just because customers can change their mind, what we're going to do is we're going to accommodate them and just turn off the layers that are concerned here. So because I need a bit more room for my layers panel, I've got my layers set to really big so it's easier for you to see them. I'm just going to double click on the properties panel tab there, and I'm going to select a few layers here, or to be more specific, the first two. So the adjustment layer is active already. I'm going to hold down Shift and click the layer beneath it to select that as well as the adjustment layer. And then I'm going to bring them into a folder, and you do that using the shortcut Command G or Control G or the small icon down at the bottom here. In fact, I'll click that because I was down there indicating so. Okay, and I'm just going to call this climber old there, not that she's old, but it's the old image of the climber. And then I'm going to turn off the visibility for that layer group, and both of those layers are turned off at the same time. Okay, so let's bring in our new image. So what we're going to do is to the file menu and come down and choose place linked, and this time we'll choose mountaintop pose JPEG. Let's bring that in, and that's almost exactly the proportions we want. We do need a whole load of sky for this, so I'm just going to double click there. However, we do need it to go from side to side, so we've got a little bit of work to do here. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this sky and remove it and let our existing sky show through. And the quick selection tool should make short work of doing that. So you're just moving around there very quickly, gets pretty much most of that selection. Just need to come into this region here to select that. Just have a quick look around there. Brilliant. We can now go to select and mask to refine that. And I didn't invert the selection. So what I'm going to do is here in select and mask, click invert on the side, and there we go. Now we've got access to that selection. Let's bring down that transparency here, our onion skin, so we've got a bit less backpack there. And in fact, we could even change that to one of the other modes if that was helpful. So let's zoom in a little bit here. So I'm going to get the zoom tool on the left hand side and just drag very gently just there and have a look at this. I think that's made a pretty good job of that selection. There is a small area just in here that we could get. So this has a quick selection tool as well, and I'm just going to change the size of it. I'm going to make this quite small here, so about 14, maybe just slightly less here just to get in there. 5 is plenty good enough, and I'll pick that up like so. So what I need to do here is to get rid of it. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and then click in that region there, and you'll see now we've got a hole through that. If I just change my view here to overlay, mine's set to green, quite often it's red, you can see the effect of the selection. And actually I'm very glad I did that, because I've found a couple of areas that do need some attention. Let me just set my color back to the default just here so you'll see it in a similar way. That arm isn't completely selected. I can tell by it being slightly orange. So I don't need to hold a key down. I'm just going to brush down there. Stay away from the edges, remember. We can deal with those later, and just get these bits just here. Nice soft edges there. So it's selecting all of those for us. Excellent. That's really good. And then what we'll do is we'll go for the Refine Edge tool here. Again, a smaller brush probably necessary for what we're going to do here. So I'm bringing this down to about 50 some odd, and just going around the edges of the hair there like so. And you can see that the selection there has grown nicely. Just going to deal with this soft edge here. Not bad. I've just gone down that edge just slightly, and it's improved that no end. That's just grand. So now we've done that, just have another quick look around just to make sure this is fine. And I think that pretty much is. I'm just going to do Command 0, Control 0 to fit that. Okay, now that's fit. What I'm going to do is switch back to the onion skin so it's ready for next time, and then hit Output to New Layer with a Layer Mask. So if I do that and hit OK, once again the other layer is still there, so all of the information is preserved, but we've got this new layer with a Layer Mask. So we need to get some rocks out to the edges here, and we're going to use something really cool to do that can analyze this, and it has a pretty good success rate with images like this. So what we're going to do is go to the Edit menu and come down and choose Content Aware Scale and find that it's grayed out. And the reason that it's grayed out is that I'm still targeted on the Layer Mask. So I'm going to come down and click on the pixels just there. Then I'll go back to Content Aware Scale. This gives us another transformation box around it, but what we're going to do is just drag out to the left like so. And can you see what's happening? That she's being preserved, but the rocks there are being transformed. Nice. In fact, I might even try and go a little bit further, just a tiny bit. Now it's starting to really stretch on that left hand side, so I think we'll be fine with just that. Again, this is one of those where you can just hit the tick or return to apply that, and there we are. Nice job. And I think it's actually fixed the mask as well. Let's have a quick look. Let's turn it off and on. So I'm just holding down the Shift key and clicking on the mask just there. Yeah, there's no visible change. The stacking order now needs to change, so I'm going to bring the backpack layer up to the top of the stack by dragging that up. That could do with a bit of transformation, so Command T or Control T to bring that down like so. And what you could do now is you could add in your other logos that you made earlier, so one of your Massif logos that you made right at the beginning of the chapter. In the next movie, we're going to look at cropping this image. So again, we're going to pretend here that we've had another request from the client, and what they want to do is actually crop this in slightly and change the size of the image that they're going to use. And we're going to do it non-destructively so that we keep the data, because here's the thing, clients sometimes like to change their mind back. And so we need to give ourselves a route back, and that's the whole thing with non-destructive editing, full stop really, is saving you doing that. One of the reasons I learnt so many things inside of the design tools in Photoshop is that I wanted to be prepared for when customers came back to me with changes so that I could deal with them as quickly as possible. Okay, so I need to move my roundel across. I brought in the roundel from earlier, and what I'm going to do is just bring that in slightly, and then I'm going to tap C on my keyboard, and that gets me the crop tool. Okay, and when you do that, this crop shield will appear around the edges of the current image area, or should do. You've got some choices here. If you have a particular ratio or size that you need to crop to, then you could access this drop down here. Okay, you could crop to a width and height times resolution and fill in these fields just here. So for example, if I went, just for argument's sake, to 16:9 widescreen format and thought actually I want 9:16, I can transpose those by clicking that like so, and then I've got a new ratio. I'm just going to clear that by clicking and then just choose ratio as it is from the top here. So if I drag this around like so, I can change my crop, and I've got this grid over the top. It's a rule of thirds grid, which you might remember from the layout chapter. And if you need to, there are other grids that you can use. There's the golden ratio, the golden spiral. So for example, if I was composing to that, then I could bring this in like so. So if I thought that was an important compositional element, of course I'd go slightly different to that and lead into it rather than be dead on it there, but I could do that. And I could choose triangles, so I've got triangle sets there for arrangement, lots of different things to use. But I'm going to use the rule of thirds for this image, so I'm going to bring this out like so to the edge, and what I want to do is get that just lined up so there's an area of interest here between the leg and the backpack. Bring that in just a shade on the side there, and then just bring that down a bit like so, and I think for this that's just fine. All I need to do now before I commit this is make sure that delete crop pixels at the top here is not selected, because if I need to go back to that once the crop is affected, all I need to do is select the crop tool. I'll just drag across here. You'll see that if I pull out to the sides, all of that content is still there. So if the customer or client came back to me and said, oh, actually I needed that taller, then I could just do that like so and bill them for the extra work. So there you are. I'm going to hit the tick, and that's it. Excellent, we're done. You didn't think you got away with it that easy, do you? It never works like that. There's always something else, but this really is the last movie in this chapter. And in this, we're going to make a black and white adjustment, because the client stroke customer stroke other imaginary job role that we're using for scenario purposes in this chapter has decided that it would look kind of nice if this was a black and white image, but with the product and the logo in full color. So we're going to make sure that happens. What we're going to do is we're going to target the last color layer that we need, which is the mountaintop pose here, with the backpack and the roundel above it. Okay, so everything else below it, if that's changed, that's just fine. We'll go back to our adjustments. So if we click on that in the panel group above the layers panel, this time we're going to choose a black and white adjustment layer. It's the third one in on the middle row. Click on that, and we get this lovely dialog, and it's a way that we can tune our image. And you can see it's pretty self-explanatory here. Let me just double click on color at the top here just to collapse that. This is the color wheel, again laid out in flat, and it goes from dark to light. So if we had yellows, for example, or reds that we wanted to make lighter, we'd pull the sliders to the right, or if we wanted to make them darker, we'd pull them to the left. And we can interpret the image from here. So I'm going to go with the yellows first of all. I'm just going to pull that up and make those slightly lighter, and you can see how the sky now is changing, getting a lot more contrasty. She's losing her elbow into it just a shade. And the reds here, I could make those maybe just a little bit lighter as well. Oops, I think I accidentally dragged the yellow slider again there. So I'll get the reds here. Let's bring the reds down just a shade, and also the magentas down at the bottom, because there's a good component of that in that sky. We've got blues here in the mountains, so we could make those a bit darker perhaps, and that'll affect the rocks in the foreground. Don't want it to go all too dark, so softly does it. Bring those cyans down a shade, and then just bring the greens up just a little bit. There's not too many greens in there. The great news is that anytime we want to adjust this, even if we worked on another layer, which we're going to do in a moment, all we need to do is to click on that icon just there for the adjustment layer, and then we can just use these controls. And there's a layer mask attached, so if you wanted to make selections or paint in there to selectively show color through, you could do that as well. I'm just going to make another adjustment here. I'm going to adjust this roundel because it's way too big. So I'm just going to get to there, and let's go to the edit menu and choose free transform. And then I'm just going to resize that. I'm going to hold down shift because this would definitely need to be proportional. Release the mouse button, then release shift, and then drag that into place. I think just down there is just fine. Double click on that. Whoops, I've got the crop tool active. So let's just say don't crop when I go for the move tool. We'll bring this backpack down, and let's just do one little thing to this. Over on its layer here, so by moving it, I've actually activated its layer. That's because I've got auto select enabled at the top here. Okay, if not, you'd have to go and target the layer manually there like so. I'm just going to double click in the area just to the right of its name, and this layer style dialog will open, and this is where we can apply different styles to a layer, hence the name. And what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of outer glow. Really, I wouldn't do this too often in an image like this, but it's a good thing to show you. What I'm going to do now is click on this area just here, so this little swatch, to choose a color. I'm going to choose something quite light. Okay, so a very light grey there. And then I'm just going to change the size here, and you can see I'm giving it sort of a glow just there. I think that needs to be a darker grey, you know, because that does not look very healthy on there. As you see now, all around it's got a little glow. You can change the spread. You can also see holes in the mask that are being affected by that as well, so I could fix those too. But sometimes you want just a tiny bit of a glow around something just to lift it from the background, and that's how you could do it. And there you are. This chapter is well and truly done. No more changes, I promise. This will be your introduction to the Illustrator workspace, and it changed quite a bit at the end of 2017 in that the control strip or options bar across the top has disappeared and been replaced by this new streamlined context-based properties panel over on the right hand side, so that we get the smoothest experience, because we're going to be using a lot of other panels throughout this particular chapter. And especially if you've only seen earlier versions of Illustrator, we're going to swap to the Essentials Classic workspace for this orientation. Okay, so to do that, if you come up to the top right hand corner of the screen here where it says Essentials, most likely it might say any one of these other things here apart from Working 18, which is my own, and choose Essentials Classic from there, then the interface will redraw like so. The next thing you need to do to make sure that we're all looking at more or less the same thing is go back to that menu and then choose Reset Essentials Classic, and that will just redraw it to the way that it shipped pretty much. Okay, perfect. So with that, we can now make our way around the interface. So top level menu system, of course, pinned to the top of the screen, unless you're on Windows, in which case it is in this application bar here. Underneath that, we've got the control strip, or options bar as some people like to call it. It is actually control in Illustrator. I can prove it to you. There it is, just there, control. Okay, but because people use it between that and Photoshop, and it doesn't really matter which of those you call it. On the right hand side, we've got panels. Now, even with Essentials Classic, they keep the properties panel in here, and it is actually worth having in here. However, it's nested with the libraries panel, and what I'd like to do is to actually drag that libraries panel out and dock it. Can you see these blue lines that are appearing? I want to dock it just down there in that group, because it will make it easier for us to use that later on in the chapter when we do that. And so here we've got an array of docked and iconized panels that just shrunk down so they're not in the way, and we'll be using some of these as we go along. And when you click on them, they'll open up like so. If you saw the movie on the Photoshop interface, very, very similar in many, many ways in Illustrator. They've got tabs, of course, across the top, and double clicking will expand and collapse those like so. And they've got a fly out menu on the right hand side and a bunch of commands that are iconized along the bottom there like so. On the left hand side, we've got the toolbox, and again throughout the chapter I'll be giving you keys that you can press. If it doesn't get you to the tool exactly, it will get you close to it so that it's easier for you to find. And with that orientation out of the way, let's get started and import a sketch and start drawing. You shouldn't just jump into Illustrator and try and draw things just with the software. The best things start on pencil and paper or in one of the mobile apps, but sketch things out first, because it gives you a chance to work out what it is you want to do and develop it, and then you can bring it in and then use the machine to assist you with the drawing. Okay, it should always be that way around rather than the machine pulling you along with it. So we've got our sketch prepared, and I've got a new document here open. So what we're going to do is create a new document for you as well. So if you do Command N, Control N, or go to the File menu and choose New, I went to the Art and Illustration profile and actually chose 960 by 560 just here. You don't need to do that. You could use any one of these sizes really, because it's not desperately relevant for the logo. And vector graphics, of course, scale perfectly, unlike Photoshop images. But if you do that, I'm just going to close out of mine because I have one already. And then when your document is ready, we'll place the sketch into it. So we do Shift Command P, Shift Control P, or go to the File menu and choose Place. And in the exercise files for chapter 6, there's a PSD file with the sketches inside of it. So if I just bring that in and then come along here and click and drag to drop that on to my artboard like so. Okay, so you should be able to drag that into place with your selection tool. If you don't have the selection tool active, just tap V on your keyboard and it will pick it up. I'm going to center that up pretty much like that. And then what I'm going to do is lock this layer and actually turn it into a tracing template. We lock it because, just like working with things in the real world, you don't want the tracing paper to move while you're tracing, because then you've got to try and line it all up again, and it's never really that successful, is it? So over to the layers panel, and here is layer 1. We could rename that in a second. I want you to just double click in this empty area here. Don't double click on the name or anywhere else, because you'll change something, typically the name or the way that this responds. So just double click here. This gives us the layer options, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to change the name here. So let's just call this Sketchwork, just there like so, and we're going to turn it into a template layer, and that will dim any images on it to 50%. Because there's some thin sketchy stuff on here, that should all pretty much disappear, and we'll just end up with the stuff that we actually do want. So that's perfectly fine. If it's ever a bit weak, just come back into it and change this value to get exactly what you want. Hit OK, and that's done. The layer gets locked automatically, and then just add a layer by clicking this icon at the bottom of the panel. Okay, so our new layer's just here. If you wanted to rename it Drawing or something like that, then just double click on the name, rename it, and hit return to apply it. Okay, I'm going to close down the layers panel just there because it's just in the way otherwise. And this is the thing that we're going to be redrawing. Now I'm going to zoom in on that, so I'm going to tap the Z key on my keyboard. And my GPU acceleration at the moment, due to a problem with the operating system, is actually turned off. And you can see this little rocket here in the application bar has this power sign next to it because I've turned it off. If yours is still on, all you need to do is go to the middle-ish of this shape, mouse down and drag outwards slowly, and you'll see that you're zoomed in quite quickly. For the rest of us, just come up maybe just out to the top here, mouse down and drag a marquee around the logo like so, and then release, okay, and you're zoomed in. If you needed to reset your zoom or do anything else, you'll find all of the commands for that in this section, okay, of the view menu. So we're pretty much ready to go. I'm just going to hold down the spacebar here and pan across slightly for my own viewing comfort. Actually, I wanted to see that more in line with the way I'm sat. I'm then going to tap V on my keyboard. Okay, that gets me the selection tool. That way I'm not going to accidentally start zooming. And I need the document rulers. So to do that in the latest versions of Illustrator, you just come across to the Properties panel and click on the ruler here if nothing else is selected, of course. Otherwise, you can go up to the View menu and find rulers, or use the shortcut Command R, Control R to turn them on and off. Take your cursor into the ruler at the top, mouse down and drag down until you're in about the middle of that flower, and then release at that point and your first guide is added. Go back up to the rulers at the top, mouse down and drag down again, but before you get to the middle, hold down the Alt or Option key and it will switch to the alternate direction. Okay, and then just line that up like so and release at that particular point. Excellent. So we've got some guides there. We can turn the rulers off if we want, either by clicking the icon or using the shortcut again, or leave them if you like. And we're pretty much ready to draw. Just one other thing before we do that, and that's to set up ready for it. Tap D on your keyboard, and that sets the default properties for drawn objects in Illustrator, which is to have a white fill and a black stroke. I just want to change the fill here to none, because that way we'll be able to see what we're doing with the lines being there, and the fill won't be obscuring our view of the underlying sketch. In the next movie, we'll actually start drawing. Oh, do you know, I love it when we sit here drawing together. It's fab. We're going to continue on with the logo that we started working on, and we're going to tap L on our keyboard. That gets us the ellipse tool from over here in the toolbox. And I'm going to draw a circle. I'm going to basically look at this line just here, because there almost is a circle just there. I'm going to move my cursor just up above it like so, to where I imagine the top of that rest of that circle will be, and the left edge of this one. I'm going to hold down the Shift key. I'm going to keep that held down until after I release the mouse button. It constrains that, and drag across like, look at that. Wow, bang. There we go, release just there, and then release the Shift key. That's not too bad, is it? I'm then going to move to the middle of the shape, and you'll see that it changes to a transform icon, which is what newer versions of Illustrator have done for quite some time. Hold down the Alt or Option key, which starts a copy, and Shift to keep it constrained, so those two together, and then drag across like so to meet the other edge of that top petal. And you can see there that I've created a copy and now they're joined. I did zoom in slightly just there as well. That's just a thing with my mouse. It does that periodically. I'm going to tap V now to get to the selection tool and drag across those two things to select them both, and then hold down the Shift key and tap M. And that gets me this fab tool called the Shape Builder, which allows me to make shapes from combinations of other shapes. Now by default it wants to add things together, but we can get it to behave with its alternate ego of take away stuff by holding down the Alt or Option key. And you can see I can click on this region here and this region here, and the result is this petal shape. Well, now we need to rotate that around a little way. I'm actually going to push mine up just a little bit as well, so I'm just going to use the arrow key here just to nudge that up slightly, I think. So if I get V for my selection tool and use my up arrow, there you go, just a bit there like so, nearer the top. That was just for my own. Yours is probably perfect. Okay, so now I've got that, I'm going to tap R. That gets me the rotate tool, and you'll see this small icon in the middle there. That's its transformation point. Well, we're going to move that, and we move it by going down to the intersection of the two guides, holding down the Alt key or Option key and clicking, and that sets the transformation point down there. It's not like Photoshop where you drag it, you just click to place it. What we need to do is get 5 copies of this. Now, I think that's 72 degrees, but the way to find out is to type 360, okay, then a slash for divided by 5. I'm just going to hit the Tab key there. Yep, it is indeed 72 degrees. I'm then going to hit copy, and that creates me a duplicate. And now I'm going to use the Transform Again command, which is Command D or Control D. So if I just do that, Command D, Command D, Command D, you can see how that's rotated around nicely, and I've got all 5 petals just there. Let's tap V quickly to get the selection tool and drag across those to select them. You don't need to go all the way around them. And then we'll get the shape builder back in because we need that again. So hold down the Shift key and tap M. Okay, and now we're going to join some regions together. So we're going to drag across these two, like so. Petal 1 done, drag across these two. Petal 2 done, these two, petal 3, these two, petal 4, and these two, petal 5. Nice, all done. We're back to the shape builder in just a moment, but first we need another rotation, and we need everything selected. So tap V, there we go. We've got everything selected, so that's fine. If you hadn't, you could just drag across those. Now tap R and move back to that intersection again, and Alt click just there. This time we're going to wind it back by about 5 degrees. So type -5, -5 into that field, okay, and hit copy. There you go. We've got a nice little duplicate thing going on there. So basically select everything again. You could actually use Command A or Control A in this particular instance because we're on a single artboard and this is the only artwork that we have. And then hold down Shift and tap M again for that shape builder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to join these two together. Okay, the two where it crosses over, we're going to just make our way around and join those two things together like so. Okay, so we've got those shapes. Then when we've gone all the way around, we're going to hold down the Alt key and we're going to remove all of the overlapping shapes. Okay, the whole lot. There we go. If I move around like so, can even drag a little bit if you want to just there. Can you see that? Now we've got this funky, nice shape for the flower. To finish this off, all we need to do is draw a small ellipse. So just tap L on your keyboard to do that. Hold down Shift, come up to here where this circle is, and just drag there. So you've got a circle of about the same size. Nice, drag that into position. All we need to do now, tap R for the rotate tool, come down to the guide intersection. Can you see how useful these guys actually are? Hold down Alt or Option and click. Okay, again, this needs to go all the way around 72 degrees, so 5 times here. So type 72. We can click copy, but if you want to be even faster at Illustrator, if you hold down the Alt or Option key and hit return, it's the same thing. And now all we need to do is Command D once, twice, 3 times, and that's it. We've got all of the necessary components for our logo complete. Save your work right now, okay? And in the next movie, what we're going to do is start to develop the color scheme for it. Now we've drawn our logo, we're actually going to get Illustrator to help us out to build the color theme for it. Everything we've drawn so far has no fill and a black stroke. So we're going to swap those things out. If we select all of these items with the selection tool, hold down Shift and tap X, that transposes the fill and stroke. You can do that down at the bottom of the toolbox just here with this small curved arrow, but the shortcut is much quicker. So we have a base color in mind and we've got RGB values for that. And so we're going to go to the color panel, which in the workspace we're using at the moment should be at the top of this stack next to the properties panel. Although if you don't find it, just go to the window menu, because that's where all of them live, in there. So we'll go to the color panel, and mine has the options showing already. If you can just see this ramp here and a few swatches above it, you can click on the flyout here and choose show options. But as mine's already open, then I'll continue with that. So the red value that I've got is 163. I'm going to tab through to the green value, which I have at 129. And the blue value at 189. And then I'm just going to hit return, and it's given me this lovely color just here, which is excellent. What I now want to do though is mix some other colors based on that. So first off, I'll save this as a swatch so that I've got it. If you go to the flyout again on the color panel, you can choose create new swatch, and this will open. I'm just going to call this lilac. Just there like so, sort of lilac-y. And it's a process color, global, which is really good, because that way if you have to edit the swatch, everything using it will change. I've deselected add to my library. We're going to do Creative Cloud libraries a little bit later on in the chapter, but you can, if you want to, and add it to a library ahead of time. Hit OK. So that swatch is now added to the swatches panel here like so. And I'm going to draw now a few shapes for the colors. So I'm going to draw a rectangle just here. M gets me the rectangle tool, and I'll just draw that and then Alt drag a copy from the center, just as we did earlier with the ellipses. Okay, so just go for that transformation point, Alt, and I held Shift as well, and then just do Command D to get the 5 supporting colors that we're going to have around this logo. So with any one of those selected, what you can now do is go to the color guide panel. That's normally underneath the color panel, but if it's not there, then just go to the window menu to get it. And this allows us to do many things. One of which is, if we click here to set this as the base color, which I think it had already picked up anyway, allows us to go through all of these different color harmonic rules in here, which is excellent. We can also get it to show variations via the flyout. You can see that warm and cool and vivid and muted, but tints and shades will be what we're after here. We want nice and soft and harmonious. So I'm thinking of a tetrad just here, so I'm just going to scroll down until I get to tetrad. Of course, remember those were the 90 degrees around on the color wheel. And then I'm going to choose some of the colors I like here from the choice of shades and tints. And it's tints I'm really after here. And I kind of like this entire column. I like that softer color here as well also. So what I'm going to do is click the topmost one. Okay, then hold down my command key, that would be Control on a PC, and click the colors there that I like and want to use. And then tap this icon at the bottom, and if I go to my swatches panel, I've got a color group just there like so. In fact, I could even drag this swatch into the color group, so now I've got my own lila color group just here. I'm then going to drag some of these swatches on to some of these rectangles. It's just typically how I work. It's not necessarily an industry prescribed way of working, it's just the way I do it. Okay, I've just done it like that for years, so, you know, just forgive me. If you want to do it a different way, that's entirely up to you. I tend to bring it out. Do you know what? I think those are going to work really well indeed. So I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to apply some of those colors to the circles here. So I'll start with the lilac-y color just there, the very light pastel one, and then I'll go around that sort of duck egg blue there, come along to the bottom here. It's nice light salmon color. My own descriptions, of course, not necessarily in total accord with yours. Sort of greenish one just there, and the nice light color just there. We turn off the background momentarily. I can get rid of these swatches now actually too. Turn off the background, go to the layers panel, and just click this icon here. That's what it looks like, the visibility icon on layers that are templates. Yep. Do you know what? I think that's going to work really well. So save your work, and we'll continue in the next movie. Now we've got our colour themed version of the logo, it's time to add the type underneath. Now I already actually know what type I've decided on because I viewed it at an earlier point, but I'd like to show you how I found it. If I swap out now to Typekit here, which is where I went, I chose to filter by sans serif because I wanted something that was clean and modern. Okay, and then I chose this Bilbo because I named my cat, and I was searching for something for him. It's nearly his birthday, and chose headings just here. Okay, and then I went by weight. I wanted something that was light and thin, and I came across Omnes, this one here, to start off with, and it kept catching my eye. I filtered by width, and it stayed there, and I went through a few of the different things, and then I typed in, as I've done here with Bilbo's name, I typed in what I was actually after, and I was going all in lowercase here. I think I started out with an uppercase letter and then decided, you know what, it actually looked better if it stayed all lowercase, and I sketched it out a few times using that as a basis, and I really liked it. So I clicked through to that just to have a bit more of a look at it and see it in place. Some of these are paid for, these ones, but these two here fortunately are included in the Typekit plan. So I decided to sync Omnes Regular in this movie, which is of course what I'm doing right now. So Creative Cloud will sync that. If I now go back to Illustrator and tap T to get the type tool and click, this creates me something called point text. It's basically text that emanates from a point. You don't have to click and drag to create a box as you do in InDesign. You can, because that creates you area text, which is very similar to the frames in InDesign. But if you just want text like this emanating from a point, it's perfect. So if I just type Leela here just now and select that, okay, what I can do is go to the character field here and type Omnes like so and hit return, and it filters it to Omnes Regular, and there it is. It's amazing that it's so fast. If I bring that out, what I'll do is I'm going to hold down the shift key again because I want proportions and just drag out like so. Wow, so close. Mine was a screenshot as well based on that. So I'll just resize that like so. Excellent. And that's pretty much how I want it. So what we can do next is we can work a little bit on some of these shapes, okay, and move them into place. So we'll do that in the next movie. In the previous movie, we installed a font into the system via Typekit and used it here to add to our ongoing Leela logo. In this movie, I just want to show you the touch type tool, which can actually do a great number of things. In fact, with my selection tool, actually, if I alt drag a copy of this text, I'll give you an idea of what it can do. If I hold down Shift and tap T, that gets me the touch type tool. It actually lives down at the bottom of the type tools here in the toolbox. Okay, but if I click on an individual character, I get this box around the side of it, and I can scale this proportionally using this corner at the top. I can scale its width, which again, if you recall, is a type crime, so I'm not going to do that. I can move it, so shift its baseline with this corner handle just here, and I can scale it disproportionately again vertically there if I want to. Again, another type crime, so just remember, avoid the top left and the bottom right hand corners. I can also rotate characters around here, right? So dragging them into place, and I can make things that are really fun. What I like using it for, apart from that, is to actually kern things, especially when I've got big text. Because if you click on a character, you can use the arrow keys to move it, and it's actually changing the kerning values between that and the neighboring character. So there's a couple of small things here I'd like to pay attention to with our logo. So if I click on this A here, for example, I do just want to bring that in just a shade, just to get it a bit closer there, just a shade too far. I want to bring this L in just a little bit also as well, and the I in just a bit too. Perfect. I'm not going by the sketch, by the way. I am actually looking at the spacing in between the characters here. I'm happy enough with that. So what I'm going to do is delete this example text at the top here. We're here with this text because I don't actually want it to be text. It's part of a logo type. I'm going to outline it. You do that with Shift Command or Shift Control O, and it turns that into outline. So no longer text at all. You can do that via the type menu as well. You'll find create outlines in it down here somewhere. There you go, just there. It's grayed out because I've already done it. What I do want to do here is this dot is going to form a replacement, okay, for the tittle over the I. If you remember from the typography, that's what that one is called. I'm going to get the direct selection tool here and then click just on that tittle. Okay, in fact, I think it's getting me the whole lot. So there's another way of doing this actually. If I double click on that I, it takes me into the character. If I double click again, I can then get into that small group, because that's what it is, a succession of smaller groups. Double click outside. Let's turn the background off for that. In fact, we're done with it now, so we can actually delete that background layer. Let me just say yes to that. There we go. I think that pretty much works. I might just need to move that just tiny shade to the side. Okay, there we go. I think that's going to work pretty well. So all we need to do now is prep this for delivery. And there's a couple of different ways we can do it. We're going to explore those in the very next movie. So now our logo is complete. What we need to do is some file tidy up and create a couple of other versions potentially. In fact, it's always a good idea to do this anyway. And then we're going to look at Creative Cloud libraries. So first of all, what I'm going to do is resize the artboard to this artwork. I'm going to tap Shift and O, which gets me the artboard tool. It's here in the toolbox down towards the bottom. And then I'm going to fit the artboard to the window, Command or Control 0. Okay, and you can see we've drawn that nice and small like so. I'm going to drag one of the corners. There are commands actually to fit this to artwork, but I prefer doing it this way while I'm talking to you anyway. And I'm just going to drag that across just to get that on the artboard there like so. Nice. And I kind of like the fact that it's got this sort of balance that goes around a bit. This isn't perfectly centered, and I like that because there's less weight on this side. It's all good. I like it. So there we are. Our artboards are now ready. And I could rename this artboard at the top here to full color like so. There's a reason for this, because we actually need a couple of other copies as well. We need a black only copy and what's called a reversed out copy or a rev out copy. Those are ones that punch out of colors. Okay, so because of course very few things have actual white ink. To do that, I'm making sure that the move and copy artwork with artboard option is enabled up here in the control strip or options bar. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and then just drag a copy across like so. You can even hold down the Shift key as I'm doing here to constrain it if you want to. Once I've done that once, I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'll just select this artboard, Alt key down, drag a copy there like so. I'm not too worried here about organizing them really because there are only 3 and that's fine. So this last one here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this one as rev out just there. Okay, for reversed out like so. And I'll click on this one here, and this one's going to be black only. I sometimes abbreviate these things to BK only, and it's my own little way of referring to them. You might have your own mechanism. And then of course I need to make these pieces of artwork actually reflect that. So if I select all of the things on the black only artboard, back with my selection tool now and dragging across them, then I'll change the color of all of these to black. If I go to my swatches here and click black, there you go, that's job done there. And similarly with the reverse out, if I select all of those things and make those white like so. So if they're placed into a document, the document will know to knock those out or to create holes in the underlying color or shapes. Once we've done that, we could do a save as on this document, and I'll actually save this into the exercise files for you, so you've got it to examine at your leisure. So you can see here that I can do this, save this as complete, just there like so, and that's great. I've got a copy on my file system should I need it. Creative Cloud Libraries, however, will make it so that it's available to me wherever I am connected to Creative Cloud. And I love that. It's so revolutionary. And even though it's been around for a few years now, it still blows me away that even on my tablet, when I'm drawing, I can get access to my Creative Cloud content via libraries. So let's go to the Libraries panel here. Okay, and I've actually got a small drop down here. This is one of the places you can add a new library from, or you can go to the flyout here and choose Create New Library. I think I'll go that route this time. So I'll call this library Leela, like so, okay, and create it. Okay, and that's it. That instruction actually goes up to Creative Cloud, and Creative Cloud actually starts making space somewhere for the Leela library to exist and connecting it to the other computers I'm signed in on and my tablets. What I could do here now is if I select the color version here, like so, I can drag that into the panel like so, and it calls it Artwork 1 at the moment. I could do it that way. I'm just going to delete that one. Okay, let that delete. What I'll do instead is I'll have it all selected and I'll click this plus down at the bottom. Okay, because I can add the graphic and the fill color here. It will take the one that's on top, but that's fine. You can see now I've got, oh, actually it's given me the white of the artboard there. That is incredibly unusual, but I'm not too worried about that. What I could do with each of these things is actually come along and just add the fill colors there as well. If I add those, you can see I could just add all of these different things to my library, and then I know I'm going to be using the right colors if I'm making other things for Leela, and I could continue doing that. With nothing selected, I'm just going to delete the one that's white there. I didn't actually mean to do that. So this one, Artwork 1, I'm just going to call this FC for full color Leela logo. Okay, and then I'll drag the black one in just here. Okay, and I'll rename this. I'll just double click on it. I'll just call it BK Leela logo. There, like so. And then finally, the reversed out copy. Okay, in there as well. So there we are. I'll just call that Rev Out Leela logo. There we are. And so Creative Cloud synchronizes that, and I can even share that with other people. So it's a great way to collaborate, and I can make it so it's read-only for the other people on my team. Really important when you're working, especially in enterprises, where people get in and fiddle around with stuff. They just do, and you don't want them to do that. To be able to share them a library, but they can't modify any of the assets. They can just use them. That's brilliant, and you can do all of that from the flyout menu here. That starts with collaborate or share a link to the library, and then it's available to everybody. So there you are. That's our brief chapter on Illustrator done. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you want to and carry on doing loads and loads of cool drawing stuff that you'll love even more, do check out my title on the Illustrator CC 2018 Essentials, and indeed some of my other Illustrator titles too. If you've watched the previous movies on Photoshop and Illustrator, then you'll be familiar with the interface tours of this title and could probably work along with me quite easily. But just in case you've jumped straight to this chapter or you're viewing it in isolation, let's have a look at where everything is in InDesign. So on the Mac, at the very top of the screen, you've got the top level menu system. On the PC, that's in this bar just underneath that, the application bar. Beneath that, we have the control strip. Photoshop people like to call it the options bar because that's what it's called there, but in InDesign and Illustrator, technically called the control strip. On the left-hand side of the screen, that's where we've got our toolbox. Whenever I'm directing you to something in this chapter, I'll be trying to give you a key to press to access it to make it easier to find. Over on the right-hand side, we have panels at the moment collapsed to icons and text, but normally they would look like this. I'm just going to drag one of the panels out so we can have a look at it. So we've got a tab just here, which if you double click on it, will collapse the panel. If I double click again, because this one's got these small little markers on it, this one has different states of collapse. So it will go like halfway and then fully collapsed. So options mode or not, as it's known. And then we've got the flyout on the side. This gives us some commands associated with the menu, and some of those get iconized down in the bottom bar. So there you are. Now you've got a rough idea of where to look when we're in InDesign. Of course, the document area will be where most of the action is. Let's get started using it. In this movie, we're going to create a document that we'll pretty much be using throughout the entire chapter. If you have access to the exercise files, you could open this file, Chapter 7 Font Sync. If I just open that now, the reason being that it's using two fonts from Typekit, and you can sync those, which will mean you have access to those fonts throughout this chapter. Of course, if you don't have access to Typekit, don't worry, you can use any fonts of your own in place. So to get started, we're going to create a new document. So File New or Command N, Control N to get to the new document dialog. So we're going to use the International Paper Size A5, and we're going to do it in landscape orientation. So dial in a width of 210 millimeters. Okay, if I just dial that back up to 210, I just accidentally nudged it. So 210 millimeters for the width and 148.5 millimeters for the height. That will set it to portrait. We're going to have 4 pages and make sure that facing pages is checked. And starting at 1, we don't need to worry about that. Columns we'll sort out in a bit. Zero out the margins. If you've got the linked icon, you should only need to type that into one field and add 3 millimeters bleed on all 4 edges and hit create. Okay, so our document's ready to go. In the next movie, we're going to work on the master pages and establish some grids. In the previous movie, we created a 4-page document and we zeroed out the margins. Now we're going to change them now on the master pages, which is where you do them if you want them to run throughout a document after you've created it. There are 3 ways that I can think of to get to the master pages. The first of which is down at the bottom of the interface here. This is the current page indicator and you can see it just there. You can also go to the Pages panel and you can see it at the top here, the master pages above this dividing line. But the way I'd really like you to do it is to learn the Jump to Page shortcut, which is Command or Control if you're on a Windows machine, and tap J for jump. I know it's the Go to Page dialog, but let's think of it as jumping there. All you then need to do is tap A and hit return, and hey presto, you are now on the master pages. Now we can view the whole spread here by either going to the View menu or using Alt Command 0, that's Alt Control 0 on a PC. Now we're going to use Type here to establish a baseline grid, okay, and also the page margins. To do this, we're going to do a few things. We're going to introduce a temporary text box, okay, and we're going to start at the top left-hand corner, okay, and make our way down to the center of the spread like so. Okay, now a cursor will be blinking away in the top there, and what we could do is actually populate this with body text. That would be kind of helpful. So the character options should be showing now in the control strip. If you're seeing the paragraph options, simply click the A there to go through. And we're going to type Kinesis because that's the typeface we introduced last time, unless you're using one of your own, and then just apply that and change the value of the size here down to 10. We're going to do 10 on 12. And at the moment it says 12 in there, but because it's in parenthesis, that means it's automatic. So we're going to override it and force it to be actually 12 because they don't go very well with baseline grids automatic settings. Once you've done that, go to the Type menu and right the way down to the bottom, bar 1, and hit Fill with placeholder text. And then we've just got some text in there for the moment. Now, it's only here temporarily just to help us out a little bit. And so what we're going to do next is hit the Escape key on our keyboard. That takes us out of the text, picks up the selection tool, and returns the control strip to things about measurement. So it's giving us units here in millimeters at the moment, or whatever unit you're in. I want to switch this across to something that relates to the text, and that would be picas. So I'm going to go to the 0 point here. That's where the rulers meet at the top left of the document window. Right click and choose picas. Okay, because we've got an interlinear space of 12 points, which of course is 1 pica. So now we can use these measurements to do some things for us. We can see here that the page is 49 picas, 7.276 wide, and it's 35 picas, 0.945 high. I'm just going to keep hold of that 945. In fact, I'm actually going to select it and copy it, Command C or Control C. Once I've done that, I'm going to go up to the layout menu and come down to margins and columns, and making sure that these things are unchecked. So at the moment it says they're not, which is just great. I'm going to type 3P in the top field just there, and then tab through to the next field. So here I'm going to do 4P, and then I'm going to paste down that value because it's going to take up the slack from the remainder of the irregular measurement. Okay, then I could do the inside here. So the inside I'm going to set to be the same as the top. So I'm just going to do 3 picas there, so 3p, and the outside more or less the same as the bottom. So I'm just going to do 4 picas just there. So more generous sort of thumb width on the outside and the inside. Because this is only a single fold sheet with just one sheet of paper, then that's just fine. For columns here, I'm going to introduce 6. There are many different ways of working with columns, and in fact I urge you to watch my good friend Nigel French's title on using grids inside of InDesign for much more information on that. And the gutter, I'm going to leave that the same as the leading, 1 pica like so, and hit OK. So my grid's there right now. If I wanted to, if I really thought it was important, what I could do is actually take that width and set the outside width to be exactly the same as well. But I'm not really overly fussed about that at this particular time. So I'm going to delete that text frame. It's done its job. And all I'm going to do now is add some guides. So I've just got some idea of the spacing of the page. Once again, that's up to the layout menu, and this time down to create guides. Here I'm just going to introduce 4 rows like so, okay, and make sure that they're set between the margins. The columns I've already got, and then hit OK. That's it. My guides are established. Let's just do the baseline grid. So this happens up in the InDesign menu on the Macintosh, down to Preferences, the Edit menu and Preferences on the PC, and then come down to Grids. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set the baseline grid. We're going to set the start to 3 picas from the top of the page because that matches our measurement here. Increment every 12 points and hit OK. Now you won't be able to see it at the moment. If you want to see it, it's available in the application bar just here that you can turn on baseline grid. And then we've got those ruled lines across there. The actual guides, they don't match up to these. They should really if you were doing a proper grid layout. So they're just there to give us a vague idea of where things are in the layout, or a slightly more informed idea, perhaps I should say. It's going to turn the baseline grid off. Then we'll go back to page 1. Command J, 1, return. There we are, back on page 1. We've got our grid. Let's start adding content in the next movie. In this movie, we're going to place some graphics into our document. We're going to do 2 or 3 different placings. We're going to place some background images, then we're going to place some images that will be moving around in just a little while. So to place a file, if you've got a frame ready to accept it or not, because it doesn't matter, InDesign will draw a frame around it anyway, so I tend, unless I've wireframed, not to. We just use the place command, which is in the file menu, but Command D for drop something here is the way that I remember it. So what I'm going to do first of all in the exercise files for chapter 7 is I'm going to add the cover image, which is just here, 0704 PSD. I don't need the import options on or anything else. I'll just hit open. Just there like so, and that comes in loaded into the placing cursor. Now because this is going to bleed off of the edges of the pages and be trimmed away, what we need to do this time is to go up to the top corner of the bleed like so, and then mouse down and drag. Don't just click because it's a really big image and it'll end up way too big. Drag until you've got it more or less aligned to the bleed at the bottom, and you can always adjust that afterwards. In fact, we'll be doing something with the fit of other images in a couple of movies' time. We can resize this one, however. What we're going to do is tap E on our keyboard